We'll talk about Spider-Man 2 in a minute, but before we do, I want to talk about something really cool. This video is sponsored by Lost in Cult. Chances are you know them already, but just in case, here's the lowdown. Outer Wilds, Dead Space, Citizen Sleeper. If you have taste, which of course you do, look at you, you're probably a fan of at least one of those games, and Lost in Cult is best known for their beautiful books that deep dive into series like them. I've been a backer of Lost in Cult's projects before. In fact, I'm waiting on one right now. Jacob Geller's How a Game Lives is a collection of essays accompanied with unique, cool as hell art, and a vinyl full of the custom songs he commissioned for those essays. But if you're not a video essay nerd, which you probably are, you have taste, of course you do, look at you. They've made gaming journal books and a hard book gorgeous deep dive into immortality containing the game's unabridged script. But as cool as all of that is, that's not what Lost in Cult want me to focus on. In collaboration with Cook & Becker and Crystal Dynamics, they've announced two landmark projects for the Legacy of Kain franchise. The first is a brand new tabletop role-playing game called Scourge of the Sarafan, set before the events of Blood Omen. The game's designed with newbies and diehards in mind, with minimalist, approachable dark fantasy gameplay and modified mechanics to fit the lore of Legacy of Kain. If tabletop games aren't your style, they've got a definitive Legacy of Kain encyclopedia called The Book of Nosgoth, full of brand new eye-catching art, illustrations, and design frills. Full disclosure, I'm a backer and this is going to live on my coffee table for the next few months. The campaign was fully funded in under 1 hour and at time of writing is blasting past some of its stretch goals, so it doesn't need you to fund it, but if you want to get in with a pre-order before it closes, the link's below. A complete edition will be available exclusively to backers before February 28th. And if any of Lost in Cult's other work takes your fancy, you can get 5% off with the code MONTYLIC with the link below. So if you want to treat yourself and show your friends you have taste, which of course you do, look at you, check out Lost in Cult and hey, tell them I sent you. Thanks again to Lost in Cult, and on with the video. 1, 2, 3. Can a superhero have a hero complex? And is Spider-Man 2 equipped to answer that question? Around 2/3 into Insomniac's sequel, Peter Parker, clad in his gloopy black suit, learns that his new threads are alien in origin. A symbiote that's leeching off him, bonding with him, changing him. Despite the danger, he squints through his mask and says,
"It makes me a better Spider-Man."
Pete's identity is so deeply entwined with being Spider-Man that he's willing to risk his well-being for the sake of becoming better at it. Spidey always feels accountable for everything. He carries New York on a back that, following the tragedy of Aunt May's death, is starting to break. The symbiote takes full advantage of that. It's not just about saving people or fighting villains, it's about how Peter's sense of self-worth is tied to his ability to wear the mask. Does a firefighter have a hero complex? A doctor? Just like Spidey, they dedicate themselves to saving people, but for Pete, being a hero isn't just a responsibility, it's an addiction. His need to prove himself, to justify his existence through his powers, blinds him to the harm he causes himself and, eventually, others. That same duality, strength and weakness, heroism and hubris, lies at the heart of Spider-Man 2 as a game. Insomniac's sequel is a tower of ambition, even if it's not bold, packed with exhilarating moments that make you feel like both Spider-Men. But like Peter, it's incredibly flawed and full of holes, and over time, my feelings on it have grown more and more complex. With every new playthrough, the suit starts to tear, the goop starts to show, and the tower is in danger of falling. Enhanced swinging, spectacular boss fights, and a dazzling new New York are hindered by a confused story, an unwillingness or inability to fix the flaws of its predecessor, and a clumsy rendition of the Black Suit arc. The collector's edition of all things boxes up my feelings better than a video ever could. I bought it. I was so excited for this game and had such trust in Insomniac that I doled out the cash to grip all 19 inches of Venom. What I got for £220 was some photo mode stamps, some early unlocks, a steelbook case, a Venom statue that shows a story moment that never happens, and a digital code for the game. No disc. That lack of disc specifically feels like the Spider-Man 2 package wrapped up in a moment, because it was accompanied by the word why. Why didn't they package a physical copy into the collector's edition when physical copies exist? Why is Miles Morales sometimes written like someone didn't play his standalone game? Why is the black suit so brief? Why is the game so buggy? Why is there stuff missing from the sequel that was such a highlight of the first title? Why does it feel like Insomniac pulled their punches? Why didn't that bother me the first time through? Are the answers in the comics that inspired it? Or was it a good old-fashioned dosing of the sunk cost fallacy? Or are the game's highs just that high that they washed away my frustrations? Like I said, it's complex. Let's see if we can figure it out together. This is a commentary and critique of Spider-Man 2.
Mr. Morales, is it? Are you sure this isn't something you can handle yourself?
I'm sure.
We open with Harry Osborn. No, Spider-Man. No, Sandman. No, Kraven! Spider-Man 2 is about a lot of things. Vengeance, balance, redemption, addiction, writing a college essay, confronting loss, fulfilling potential, cults, saving one person versus saving everyone. Writing a college essay, what we do with limited time, feeling static and stuck, hero complexes, Peter Parker's retirement, and did I mention the college essay? But the focus in our opening is direct and confident. It's all about exploring a world where two Spider-Men are sharing New York. What originated in the first game, set up in the DLC and established in Spider-Man Miles Morales, explodes in the sequel's first 10 minutes. Jostled along with levity so that the tone of Spider-Man, the spectacle, isn't lost in all this stuff that's whirling around the narrative. Because he lost his job in Spider-Man 1, what with his boss flipping his lid, Peter Parker is now a science teacher at Brooklyn Visions Academy, the charter school that Miles attends. It's his first day on the job, a new dawn for Peter Parker with stable income, and he makes it exactly 1 minute and 42 seconds before spider duties call him away. It echoes the openings of Spidey 1 and Spider-Man Miles Morales. A choice is made. Personal responsibility versus super responsibility. Miles sacrifices his education to swing out into the city. Pete has to choose between his new job or his other job. Teaching seemed like a natural next step for Insomniac's Peter. He grew into a competent and inspirational mentor through training Miles, but the opening seconds of the sequel prove that no matter how perfect the fit, Spider-Man will always swallow up Peter. If he keeps going this way, the suit will become inescapable. Bad for Pete, but good for New York. Sandman is on a rampage. Speaking to IGN, Peter's voice actor Yuri Lowenthal said, "Pre-symbiote Peter is 99% concerned with people other than himself. He's worried about his friends, he's worried about his family, he's worried about every citizen in New York City before he thinks of himself. That concern stretches to his villains as well. Sandman is tossing cars and breaking buildings downtown, and as we head over to confront him, Pete states that we gotta help him before he hurts someone, or himself. Not that they need to take him down or kick his ass, but that they need to subdue him and help him. Even after all this time, even after a villain caused the death of Aunt May, the desire to help remains." But as we race on to Sandman, we're not thinking of the character drama, we're thinking of the spectacle.
I know you're angry at me!
This has nothing to do with you. Leave me alone!
Flint Marko, aka Sandman, first dusted the page in 1963's Amazing Spider-Man number 4. He was one of the first bad guys Stan Lee and Steve Ditko pit against the Webhead. While he's developed a conscience in the years since and has even technically been an Avenger, his first story shows a brutal, hard-boiled criminal. He's unfazed by Pete's new spider beacon. Shocking. In a scrap, he tears Pete's mask and forces him to retreat. Gasp. He slinks around like a snake to get away from the cops. Nefarious. In the end, Spidey resorts to grabbing a vacuum cleaner and sucking him up. Not his proudest moment, but hey, if it works, it works. Sandman is a rogue that lends himself to a larger scale like this. Spider-Man 1 had the siege on Fist Tower and Miles Morales had rhinos race through the city, but Sandman heralds a widening of scope. Literally. This is a city-wide boss fight. He's grown to the size of a skyscraper, a tumbling mass of dirt and debris that proves exactly why Peter needs the help. This is a two-spider job. Miles and Pete are presented as partners, no longer teacher and student. They work together to get out of school and unite to take down Sandman, with Miles acting independently of Peter to showcase his growth, suggesting ideas and synergizing during combat. Pete's trust of Miles is implicit. As Sandman grows more and more out of control, Miles suggests redirecting a lightning bolt through his body and charging it back at him. On the surface, it's a risky move, but Peter believes in Miles and embraces the idea with gusto. It's like there's a checklist of everything cool that you'd want to see in an opening like this, and it all gets ticked. Pete and Miles swinging through the streets together. Tick. A gigantic Sandman throwing a little Spider-Man across the city. Tick. The Spider-Men working together and alternating attacks. Tick. Peter juggling an awkward Parker phone call while battling a villain. Tick. Swinging and battling through trash skyscrapers. Tick. Flying and thwipping around Sandman in real time. Tick. Blasting through a sand hurricane, dodging huge chunks of rubble. Tick. Miles bioelectricity crystallizing Sandmen. Tick. The iron spider arms. tick. I know this one's a bit controversial, but I really like them when used sparingly. But most importantly of all, Peter and Miles are saving people as a priority. Tick, tick, tick. There are a few points in our Explodathon where the two heroes are synchronizing their acrobatics, their webs, their strength to rescue New Yorkers as part of the Sandman fight. They are heroes that rely on each other, embodying the marketing tagline. They've become greater together. Spectacle threads together a lot of the sequel's action, and the big moments are here in greater numbers than ever before. Sandman is just the start, and while it is breathtaking, it's got steep competition. The third act of the game might lose its sense of spectacle and drown in missed opportunities, but the raft attack, Black Cat chase, lizard sequence, Venom's assault, Mysterio's illusions, the suburban nightmare, the refinery, Coney Island, they define the game, and they're more powerful than ever because of two reasons. Number 1. Spidey 2 takes from Spidey Miles in that it understands video game spectacle is only truly spectacular when the player contributes to that spectacle. Take the moment that everyone likes to refer to, Miles flying across Manhattan and slingshotting back into the action. We transition from swinging around Sandman actively battling him to flying away and back again in-engine, all within the space of a few seconds. Control isn't ripped away from the player for long, so the code is disguised and feels like player input. And number 2, because the spectacle often comes back to being a hero that saves people. Sandman, the raft, the lizard chase, and Coney Island all touch on saving civilians. Black Cat, the refinery, and Anti-Venom are concentrated around saving a superpowered being.
If you need help, all you have to do is ask.
You're the ones who are gonna need help when they come for you.
That emphasis on saving people continues long after the fight. Flint Marko is shipped off back to the raft with a strange warning. Something bad is coming. But don't worry about that, the streets need cleaning and the police are conspicuously absent. The days of Spider Cop are through. With the ominous disappearance of Yuri Watanabe and the death of Miles' father, Jefferson Davis, neither Spider-Man has a link to the NYPD to capitalize on. That's likely a response to the criticism levied against the first game. There, Spider-Man's affinity for the police led to some awkward characterization where he set up privatized surveillance towers for them. Speaking to Eurogamer, the creative director, Brian Intihar, responded to claims that Spidey 1 was, quote, propaganda. That obviously wasn't our intent, he said. I think just going forward, we think about things. There are no towers in this next game. Now we are concentrating on firefighters and rogue vigilante justice. Sand coats downtown, the streets are thrashed, and innocent bystanders who were caught up in Sandman's rampage need a little help. Part of the charm of a Spider-Man story is watching him cobble together information from a wide variety of sources. In the early comics, that typically came from assignments from the Daily Bugle, but this is a video game, so it's all about the friendly neighborhood app.
This looks like a drone. We don't spy on people, Genki.
Oh, no. It's all opt-in. Just New Yorkers sending messages to the app, which gets routed through these drones, which I call Focused Relay Neighborhood Data Spots.
Genki Lee is now the guy in the chair for both Spider-Men, showing a sincere evolution for Pete. He's learned to rely on civilians like MJ or Genki to be a better Spider-Man, and he's learned from Miles by adopting the app. We don't spy on people, Genki, Pete says, dizzyingly flashing back to his 10th Oscorp tower. Reinforcing the savior part of Spidey's hero complex is especially important for this story because banging the drum over and over and over again means you slowly notice its lack of emphasis or outright absence when Pete gives himself entirely to the black suit or Miles starts to thirst for vengeance. Feeling like Spider-Man is about more than punching the bad guys. It's about helping people, even if they don't ask for it.
On your left!
Hey, Spider-Man! Look who it is!
What? Where am I? Spider-Man!
Spectacle doesn't need to equal levity. Just look at the wildness of the lizard chase that's simultaneously the game's most thrilling moment and one of its most foreboding. The long-term issue with the game is that it pulls a lot of its punches when things get darker. But tonally, that darkness is able to coast on how strong and funny its first few hours are, so that when the levity vanishes, things feel more threatening and serious. Spider-Man 2 is the funniest game in the series, with some lines that force out a cackle rather than just a warm grin.
I'm fresh out of honey.
but levity definitely crawls under a lot of the early game's spectacular moments. Whether it's good old-fashioned Spider-Man quips, outright banter between Miles and Peter when they share a screen to show their unity, the smaller comedy of rescuing J. Jonah Jameson from a stuck limousine, or the cute back and forth between Harry and Pete, it reminds us of the narrative fun factor that comes with being a Spider-Man. But it's not all fun and games, and as we pivot away from Spidey and over to Peter Parker, we see that clearly. I think the aspects which shape Peter Parker are those very common to young people who go through a whole series of existential doubts and conflicting desires about who they are and where they stand in their world. It's about identity and self-discovery and figuring out a little more about who you want to be and who you think you should be. That's what's so intriguing about the Spider-Man concept. The fact that Peter Parker openly raises his doubts so that the readers of the comic strip could share his worries and fears. He's not an all-powerful, all-knowing cardboard superhero. He's not a superhero at all by that standard. He's very mortal, someone who agonizes a lot about his role in life. The darker edges are what make the film interesting for me. Before she died, Aunt May was paying $4,500 a month on her mortgage with an interest rate of 6.8%. Hey New Yorkers, does that sound normal to you? Because if it is, what happened to your housing market? Her home is a fusty, preserved memorial to her and Pete's inability to grieve fully. Her bedroom is the only room in the house that's clean and tidy. Less because Pete has looked after it, and more because he likely can't bear to go in.
Whoever doesn't write a front page story in the next week is fired.
Oh, well, you'll be fine then, because you're the best reporter they have.
Our time here is a reminder of May's legacy, how she hid her struggles from Pete, a family trait that she unwittingly passed on to her nephew. In a flashback, she teaches Pete one of her many lessons, the importance of balance. Peter punches a hole in the wall in frustration and she turns it into a doodle. Balance is a process, she tells him, not a destination. It's a lesson he never learned in her lifetime, but one he'll be forced to confront soon. He acknowledges to himself that he's taking too much on. The mortgage on the house, maintaining a relationship with MJ, finding steady work, and of course being Spider-Man. Something's got to give, but between May's death, the house disappearing to some carrier and training Miles, the chaos and repeated change has trapped him and he doesn't see a way out. The only constant he has is Spider-Man. His need to be a hero is all he can cling to. Mary Jane Watson has her own struggles. Her book on Symkaria barely sold anything, an outcome anyone could have predicted because current events books about distant countries never sell well. But that's just the start. J. Jonah Jameson has returned to the Daily Bugle, meaning he's her new boss, and if she doesn't start writing articles he likes, she might get fired. Even so, she offers to cover the mortgage if Pete wants to take some time off to reset, because I guess she has $5,000 just lying around, and Peter naturally refuses. He knows he should, but the city needs him. Or rather, he needs the city. Distraction comes in the form of Harry Osborn, thankfully wasting no time in confessing that he was never in Europe like he claimed, and was in fact deep in New York for years.
I missed you.
I missed you too.
The game hurtles along with its setup. The Spideys have been tutorialized and characters have been established, but that hurtling doesn't mean we barrel past an opportunity to slow down and soak in Peter's life. The sequence in May's house is just one part. Around 45 minutes total is given over to playing as Pete here, and while it can feel like a pain on consecutive playthroughs, I'd argue it's completely necessary to glue Pete and Harry together before Kraven and the symbiote enter from stage right. Harry has a surprise for Pete at Midtown High, and best of all, it comes with 0 science puzzles. Hope that continues. The flashback to Pete and Harry's teen years, sneaking into school in the dead of night, doesn't just teach us about their brotherly love, it also gets into the basics of stealth. So, let's trip back into the game's first pitfall. Pitfall, you might ask? I quite like the stealth system actually. I'm gonna write an angry comment about how you're full of shit, and while I'm at it, I'm gonna subscribe. Well, be my guest, Daniel, but hear me out first. I also like Spider-Man's stealth, or at least the idea of it. Zipping to the ceiling, crawling on the wall, having the freedom to wriggle around a space and not be limited to set sticking points immediately adds freedom and thrill to sneaking around and kicking ass. It was fun in 1, it was fun in Miles, and it is still fun here. But I want more from Spider-Man's stealth than mild fun. I want meat, I want a desire to return to it, I want it to be given the same depth and complexity as combat, and the sequel does not go nearly far enough.
I don't know if it was like a conscious choice of like, oh, we're not going to do stealth. I don't think it was that. It just kind of weirdly played out like that. And I do think that, maybe we did miss some opportunities there, here and there. I mean, I wouldn't go back and go, oh my God, I'd redo the whole game. But I do think I understand it's definitely a fair critique.
The big addition here is in the web line. It lets you make your own walkways and perches with complete freedom, even outside in the open world. You can activate a maximum of 6, creating your own little web of shadows that threads corners of a room together to let Peter or Miles creep around and yoink grunts high in the air and tie them up. Eventually, you can even yoink 2 goons at once to speed things up. It's controlled, it's precise, and it's the exact sort of power fantasy you would want from feeling like Spider-Man. It adds versatility to the game's stealth, but that's as far as positive changes go. Elsewhere, the game cuts so much that worked in past titles, so the whole thing feels like a collage of hits and misses that never synergize. It's content with spatial freedom being it. But that's not enough to carry a 25-hour game. The impact web, the tripwire web, and knocking goons down to turn them into a web bomb are now inexplicably missing. That last one especially rewarded creative play in Miles Morales. The limiting of gadgets means the Spider-Men have less deliberate options than they did in their previous respective games. Now that word deliberate is key here, because there are other options, but they come with a dice roll to see if they work. Using web shooters to distract goons and pull them into place are as useless as ever because they never travel far enough and sometimes the henchmen just ignore them. Thankfully, the concussion blast can later be upgraded to summon enemies more confidently. Eventually, web shooters can be upgraded to sometimes shoot henchmen back in a similar fashion to the impact web, but it's all chance-based. You need to launch 4, 5, 6 webs at one goon while crossing your fingers, toes, and sucking on a lucky charm that they will maybe fly off and stick to a wall without alerting every enemy in the vicinity.
Hold them off for just a minute. I got an idea. What should I do? Don't get caught?
During story-based missions, like here in the school, the player is funneled constantly to on-rails stealth that undermines the few systems we do get to play with. That's fine for this flashback. At the end of the day, it's a tutorial where we're playing as a Peter early in his career without the gadgets and gizmos. I mean, just look at his hair. Christ, Pete, I would believe. But the leash tightens at random moments long past a point that feels reasonable. Let's flash ahead a few hours to Kraven's manor. Here, Pete needs to steal meat for a pet tiger. You can't distract guards so they give you an opening, despite that being a mechanic that we've used elsewhere. It restricts how far your webs go to grab it, despite being only a couple of feet away. You can't nab it by attaching to a ceiling and lowering yourself, something explicitly tutorialized during the gym sequence in the school flashback. The only solution to this contrived puzzle is making a web line and walking over the meat. Here I am pressing L1 and R1 with the prompt on screen, but nothing is activating. Here I am tossing webs around willy-nilly and nobody is reacting. When the game gets over itself and lets us play in its world, you do start to notice the more important and significant improvements. Namely, the level design. While Pete and Miles have a tiny bag of tricks to pull out whenever they want, the levels give us more contextual opportunities than ever before to play with our food. Picture this. Kraven's hunters have taken over an old base and are growing plants and fauna that will help in their hunt. Spider-Man slinks in through the sewer and crawls along the ceiling, distracting the hunters long enough to poison the plants and put some of them to sleep. A wholly unique opportunity for crime fighting that embraces a non-lethal takedown with a touch of edge. It highlights the darker tone of the game and rewards us for thinking outside the box. Stealth arenas are vast and intricate, weathered forts and crumbling mansions with numerous floors. An old, repurposed Sable base with a gigantic warehouse and dozens of rooms and a large courtyard to separate enemy sightlines. Oh, I love it! Symbiotes never let us use stealth, and the Flame have no enemy types or gimmicks that lend to sneaking, but the Hunters brandish these spaces with traps that stun us, and if we're smart, we can use their weapons against them. As a faction, the Hunters are refined, skilled, well-funded, and well-armed. Under Kraven's leadership, they've been preparing to lay siege to New York for months, and their toys transform them from flies in our web to acid that can melt it away. Talon drones patrol the skies, often your first target when a stealth arena opens up. They'll perch on web lines or glide near walls and ceilings, so when things kick off, there is an immediate threat you need to neutralize before you can get your bearings. The rafters of a stealth arena are no longer a safe place to skulk. Some of the hunters can grapple up to vantage points at a whim, something that would require tactical play if they were ever implemented in a stealth arena. Perhaps during playtesting, Insomniac found that these guys made the challenge annoying, but I'm disappointed that they are relegated to open warfare. My favourite enemy type, however, are the beasts. Large robotic dogs pad around, and if Miles or Peter get spotted, they'll blast an electric charge that deactivates our abilities. That is beautifully, deliciously annoying because it means stealth screeches to a halt and we are entering combat with a handicap. But the real challenge comes from what it does to Miles. It disables his invisibility, frying his power fantasy. I love this. His ability to camouflage himself gives him one extra mechanic from Peter. He can vanish on a whim and leap into the rafters if he's spotted by an enemy, meaning stealth isn't immediately over if one goon catches his web. It would have been all too easy to give Peter a camo gadget so he could also turn invisible, and I'm so glad that Insomniac did not do that. It's one of the few ways the game differentiates the two Spider-Men, especially when Pete dons the black suit. Symbiote Spidey should be raw, unparalleled strength in slime, and we would lose some of that if he could also tap a button on his chest and go all chameleon on us. Looking at the franchise as a whole, invisibility makes Miles the stealthy Spider-Man to Pete's gadget Spider-Man, though seeing as this game takes a hatchet to Pete's gadgets, that is no longer the case.
I got a second chance. I'm gonna take advantage of that. But I need you with me, Pete.
Wow, this is, a lot to process.
Harry Osborn wants to heal the world, an idea planted in him by his late mother, Emily. It's a desire Pete shares with him, both fueled by the death of a maternal figure. To honour the women who inspired them, Norman Osborn has created the Emily May Foundation as a gift for his son because he doesn't do things by half measures, and Harry wants Pete to join him as CEO. What a lovely thing to do, you might say, and you're right, Daniel, it is lovely. Thank you for being so engaged with the video. Harry didn't grace the comics until 1965, Amazing Spider-Man number 31, and he was an asshole. He first appeared in Pete's life when he started college. Aunt May's in the hospital. Pete spends all day worrying about it, unable to think or focus on anything else, so he ignores Harry and Flash Thompson when they catcall him in the cafeteria. Flash and me both hate squares, Harry smirks through his bloody bow tie. Nothing's wrong with that, this'll take that swell head down a peg. He mixes up Pete's chemicals in class and makes it explode. It wouldn't be for years later that the two became friends, long after Pete first took down his father's alter ego, the Green Goblin. Insomniac's Harry is nothing like that. He was always nice. He's nicer than nice. To use the 60s lingo of his comic origin, he is downright swell. He drips lovely, with good intentions, great ideas, a keen scientific mind, and a big, big heart. His motivations are simple and streamlined. He wants to honour his mother's memory, and after facing his own mortality, he wants to use the time his father's bought him to do good. There is nothing to dig into beyond that. Harry might be lovely, but he is also quite toothless. That is likely on purpose to show how much of a corrupting influence a symbiote is when he later turns into Venom, but it doesn't make him any less boring. A lot of time is dedicated to setting up Peter and Harry as more than friends, brothers, and because of the earnestness and sincerity, it is easy to bask in the warmth of their friendship. But it is also quite boring, right? And if you think Harry is mishandled, just wait until we get to Miles.
And even I'm bored already.
You won't have to wait long, let's get to Miles. I loved Spider-Man. I used to play the video games on the Game Boy. I would watch it on Disney XD. I've seen a lot of those Spider-Man cartoons. I feel like I've seen them all. The essence of Miles, which is really the spirit and the drive, is reflective of my own. These are people that have saved multiple lives and will continue to save multiple lives. Someone could say they're crazy, it's just how they wear their mask. I really hope people just love this movie. I hope it inspires everybody to pay attention to how they're wearing their mask. Miles' writing is a story of two halves. Behind curtain number 1, we have him confronting his feelings for Martin Lee, exploring his rage and thirst for vengeance, while asking how we achieve redemption when the people we hurt don't forgive us. It's delicate and chewy, and I love it. Behind curtain number 2, we have him struggling to write a 200-word essay. The through line seems to be that he's finding the balance between spider and man that Pete struggles to achieve, reconciling them by leaning on a support network. Now, where have I seen this before? Yep, his solo game, where we covered all of that in ways that were much more interesting than a word doc. While Miles' personal essay is a flat, one-note metaphor that never feels as powerful as the game thinks it is, the way the game reflects his bitterness and inner conflict with Martin Lee is some of the series' best character work. Miles carries the exaggerated swagger of a teenage boy who lost his father and his best friend before his 18th birthday. That bubbling rage began with Mr. Negative, so when Miles sees him again after all this time, being escorted from the raft, something starts to ache inside him. His body crackles and sparks with bioelectricity.
Miles?
Kraven's hunters attack, so let's put that anger to work and talk about the combat. When putting Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man Miles Morales side by side, what you get are two very different combat feels to complement two very different Spider-Men. Spidey 1 was all about gadgets and webs, swinging goons so they stick to the floor, blasting impact webs to glue them to cars, suit mods like the Web Blossom that cover an arena in the white sticky stuff. Spider-Man Miles Morales focused less on the webs and more on the punching, bringing bioelectric abilities into the fray, so your top priority in fights was filling up your venom meter so you could whirl through bad guys as a destructive thunderstorm. It meant that Miles and Pete felt like different heroes with unique power sets, despite sharing the Spider name. Spider-Man 2, in its ambition to let us play as two Spider-Men, loses that combat uniqueness because they share everything. The gadgets have been diluted, webbing is no longer the priority for either Spidey, and with a couple of exceptions, the abilities are relegated to animation changes and different particle effects. That is disappointing, but what we're given instead has the bang, pow, and in the case of the symbiote splat factor that makes combat fun, weighty, and might homogenize Pete and Miles, but gives Spider-Man 2 an entirely original game feel from the rest of the series. In the name of making both heroes feel more agile and acrobatic, air combos are now a priority with a chunk of the skill tree dedicated to them. There are more options for keeping a goon in the air than ever before, and doing so ups the damage dealt. While juggling a bad guy, enemies try to interrupt less. Not to the point where it feels like they're standing around with a thumb up their ass, but certainly to the point where you're incentivized to stay as high as you can for as long as you can. You can bounce bad guys off the floor, you can slide underneath them mid-air and kick them even higher, meaning there's skill and the inevitable thrill that comes with staying airborne for as long as you like. While webs remain a tried and true strategy for a one-hit kill, and we can shoot more webs here than we could in the first game, it takes a lot more of the sticky stuff to fully stun a bad guy, and it takes a second longer to swing them into an object. Concussions are the general goal, not subjugation, lending to Miles' stress and Pete's darker turn with the black suit. Just look at how disarming an enemy works now. We don't rip it off and spin it around, we launch it straight back with pinpoint accuracy. The parry contributes to that brutality too. It's crunchy, rarely necessary, and grounded. That last word, grounded, is what's important. The biggest issue with the parry is it runs counter to how desperately the game wants to make us feel agile. You cannot parry in the air, your feet need to be firmly planted on the ground, and every ounce of the game's conditioning teaches us that if we're on the ground, we're fighting wrong. It does showcase Pete's raw strength, and I wish Insomniac were a bit braver and limited it to the symbiote. Make it a move unique to the black suit, cut it from Miles altogether. This would reinforce how Peter is so wild and indestructible with the goop on his skin. Make it so that he doesn't want to dodge. With the symbiote, he prefers to be in the thick of it, punching through attacks. Complementing that emphasis on strength are the abilities, taken straight from Miles' game and carried over here. Miles can blast and spark with all the bioelectric abilities he earned at the end of his origin story. Don't worry, we'll talk about the abysmal skill tree later. And Pete has the spider arms so he doesn't feel left out. It seems that he's been working on these since May's death. His determination to be a better Spider-Man has led to arming himself with 4 extra arms, drawing the first of a few parallels to Doc Ock. Pete gets 10 abilities to choose from while Miles gets 8, and as cool as these power-ups are, I wish there was more freedom to the customization. Thankfully, this attack by the Hunters offers up the perfect example.
But I saved you.
Really?
It's not just Mr. Negative that the Hunters are looking for, he's just the B-side to Scorpion, who stabs Miles with his drugged up stinger and sends him on a vision quest. Miles sees a world where his friends and family don't mourn his loss, where he never lived up to his father's memory. The stress of the attack, combined with seeing Martin Lee again, evolves Miles' bioelectricity, and Electric Blue is born. It's a wholly unique addition by Insomniac, with little to no basis in the comics. In fact, at the time of this video, Miles' powers now let him conjure Venom lightsabers. Oh, very Spider-Man. Chain Lightning lets us shoot electricity from our fingertips. Thunder Burst is an area of effect attack that bursts out in a ring and hits a group of enemies. Reverse Flux zaps bad guys and pulls them in close. Galvanize uppercuts someone who then acts as a conduit that shocks his friends. They're all flashy, destructive, concentrate on attacking lots of goons at once, and each one is tied to a specific hotkey. For example, Chain Lightning and Venom Punch are both L1 plus square, so you have to pick between one or the other. The limitations force us to make choices, but I wish Insomniac prioritized freedom and creativity instead. I like both of these attacks, can't I just map Chain Lightning to L1 plus circle instead? No, says the video game, didn't you hear? The most freedom you'll get in Spider-Man 2 is changing the color of the Adidas suit. Pete's spider arm abilities are gorgeous to look at, but don't do enough to separate him from Miles. Spider Whiplash launches a group of enemies into the air the same way Miles does with Venom Jump. Spider Shock is just Chain Lightning because Pete has to have electricity attacks right, and we cut that from the gadgets. Spider Rush is a clumsy looking Venom throw without the sense of control. Spider Barrage is the standout here. It looks awesome with numerous quick fire punches and kicks that make Pete feel free and fast in contrast to Miles' single motion crunchy punches. Soon, the symbiote will bring another set of 4 abilities, and that is where Pete's combat evolves to be something stronger, rawer, and gooier. Venom Punch is a long-distance crack to the jaw that can slam an enemy into a wall. Venom Strike is identical to Spider Rush, with the same lack of precision that would feel purposeful to show the uncontrollable strength of the symbiote if Spider Rush didn't do this already. Venom Tempest sucks bad guys into Pete and then launches them into the air. It combines Miles' Venom Jump and Reverse Flux for something twice as powerful. Venom Yank, get your mind out the gutter, grabs numerous enemies, launches them into the air, and slams them into the cold, unfeeling concrete. Anti-Venom Blast is Miles' Thunderburst without the electricity, and Anti-Venom Bomb throws Pete into the air and tosses a heap of goo at the bad guys. You'll notice that between the spider arms and the symbiote, there's a lot of overlap. The one thing that truly differentiates Pete from Miles is that all of the symbiote attacks, if aimed right, will automatically stick enemies to walls and objects. All of Miles' attacks will shock enemies to weaken them instead. The animation does a lot of the selling for both. Miles fries while Pete goops, but the outcome is different, even if the strategic use is the same. Another differentiator is in Pete and Miles' special moves. Pete enters Rage Mode, where the symbiote takes over, his senses are heightened, and you can mash square for immediate finishers. Rage Mode especially makes combat a cakewalk. Every attack by Pete shoots across greater distances because the tentacles envelope him. Miles can unlock a Mega Venom Blast that slows down time and sparks out a web of electricity. That special move is taken straight from a solo game, but its economy is different. In fact, the whole combat economy has undergone a major change that I think is a little too restrictive compared to previous games. Let me explain, let's clamp down on the grit. Focus returns, a bar that fills up the more you dodge, smack, and parry to let you heal or do finishers, but it's been tweaked so you can't use it unless it hits a threshold. In the previous game, you could use whatever focus you generated to heal yourself, even if it was just a tiny bit. Now, you need to wait to fill at least one focus bar. The abilities all operate on a cooldown, something that takes some of the flair out of the combat. In Miles Morales, you could fill your Venom meter to max and do, say, 3 Venom punches in a row if you wanted to. Now, an ability will always cool down after use, so there's waiting between uses. Gone are the days of saving up your Venom meter for 3 back-to-back special moves. Your priority is speeding up that cooldown. Once upon a time, the Mega Venom Blast was just one of those standard abilities. Now it has its own special meter that fills up independently. It's a spectacular move, and the sugar rush that comes with it is enough to make me diabetic, but it's not worth the attention span to juggle a separate meter. If you spam all 4 of your abilities at the start of a fight, that doesn't mean the toolkit's empty. Gadgets have been hotkeyed to the R1 button, but just like there, they've also been frustratingly and completely stripped back. The gadgets were so annoying in Spider-Man 1. I hated stopping the game to bring up the weapon wheel, it broke the flow of combat. Shut up, Strawman! Are you happy now that they've cut them? Are you happy now that you have less options in combat or stealth? stealth. This is all your fault, you bloody Mysterium. Miles having just 4 gadgets in his game made sense because A, he's not the gadget Spider-Man, so it made him feel different to Pete, and B, that game was his origin story, so stripping back his abilities was narratively cohesive. But now we have Insomniac's gadget Spidey, Peter Parker, getting rid of electric webs in favor of a single ability with a cooldown. Now the Trip Web, Web Bomb, and Impact Web have all been cut, dampening the power fantasy and slapstick joviality that comes with feeling like Spider-Man. What's left is the Concussion Blast, something that doesn't feel like Spider-Man at all and only feels like it's here so it can be transformed during the Symbiote Act. Then there's the Upshot, that's just the Gravity Well, a gadget that does lend to aerial combat but is the furthest thing from a Spider-Man specific gadget. Over here is Ricochet Web, which is just the web bomb but less controlled and tactical, and then there's the Web Grabber. This is my favourite gadget by far because it pulls henchmen and random objects together in a goofy display that sets up and synergizes with an area of effect ability. I don't know if I'm alone in this, but all tactical and strategic use of the gadgets went out the window because I wasn't forced to slow down time, check the weapon wheel, and think. Instead, I just hold the trigger and circle my finger around the buttons. It made for spectacular carnage, but was completely mindless. Because Miles isn't the Gadget Spider-Man, and halfway through this game Pete becomes the Symbiote Spider-Man, gadgets weren't viewed as a priority because they shouldn't be a priority for either hero. Mechanically, the argument goes that Insomniac had to cut the gadgets down to 4 because they didn't want players to stop time and jump into the weapon wheel again, but there is a way around that. Force us to pick gadgets the same way we pick abilities. Let us define how our Spider-Man plays. And if you want to be really bold with it, you could make Pete refuse to use his gadgets for the 5 minutes that he's dickhead Spider-Man consumed by the symbiote. And speaking of dickheads,
Spider-Man.
Lee.
in the frenzy of the Hunter's attack, Martin Lee gets trapped underwater and Miles considers leaving him to die. Spider-Man tries to save everyone, hero or villain, but for a moment, Miles has tunnel vision, and he forgets that. A couple of civilians nearly die because of this, and the Hunters get away with their prey. Aside from one snap at the end of the Black Suit arc, this is darker than anything Peter Parker does the whole game. It's a deeply human moment for Miles that unfortunately gets lost because it weakens Pete's fall to madness later on. The game struggles to balance both Spider-Men to the point that Miles feels sidelined for huge chunks and feels like a distraction from Pete's storyline, and that's a pretty great descriptor for how they're handled when sharing the screen during gameplay. Despite boasting about the quick-fire loading times on the PlayStation 5, there's no dynamic hopping between the two Spider-Men during moments like here during the Hunter's attack. Even though Pete and Miles are facing down hordes of henchmen, you're locked to playing as one Spider-Man. 8 years earlier, Rocksteady's Arkham Knight struck this balance in a way that hasn't been replicated since. There, Bats could team up with Nightwing, Catwoman, Robin, and with a single button press, time would slow down and we'd swoosh over to kicking ass as our ally. There's no system like that in Spider-Man 2, and it is the mother of missed opportunities. It would let us create the spectacle. Imagine grouping together enemies as Pete, switching to Miles, and then leaping in with a Mega Venom Blast. Despite that limitation, taking the wins where we can, fighting with friends has undergone a major upgrade since the first game. We fight alongside Pete, Miles, Harry, Wraith, Mr. Negative, and Black Cat before the credits roll. And nearly all of them come with their own unique finishers and incorporate you and whichever ally you're playing as. Miles swings by and kicks a goon in the head while he waves at Pete. Felicia Hardy opens portals for us to kick through or zip through to teleport to a different side of a combat arena. We might not control our allies, and we might not throw it between Pete and Miles on the fly, but we certainly feel their presence, making fights more bombastic and chaotic in a way that embodies Spider-Man. And who we fight brings that chaos too.
Who were those guys?
Whoever they are, they're packing some serious tech.
And now they got all that, plus Scorpion and Lee.
In the art book, Insomniac's Jacinda Chu wrote, "Although it makes sense if hunters have hunting rifles, it makes less sense if they're hunting with machine guns. We looked at dart guns and made them a bit more advanced for the hunters to use in place of them. The hunters also have rocket-propelled harpoons in place of rocket launchers. When Kraven's hunters invade New York, they bring sacks filled with the spice of life." Variety. Standard grunts, harpoonists, elite hunters that wield weapons, berserkers, talon drones, and Fidos bring that robotic, mechanized motif that bonds so many of Insomniac's foes, with the rustic design of jungle warriors. With those human enemies, there are variations on top of the variations. Some harpoonists remain grounded while others grapple to ledges. Some shoot nets and others shoot rockets. Berserkers will hold an axe or a shield and spear, crackling with electricity to plant them in a fantasy New York of present day. Because air combos are the priority, hunters become prey and predator because they shoot electric nets in the air that can drop Miles or Pete if we swing into them. It's a really effective counter strategy that unifies them thematically while remaining a challenge. When they're not looming on rooftops, the Cult of the Flame is running rampant in the streets, burning as they go, and bring finicky, feisty flamethrowers. They're a nightmare to dodge, can't be parried, and are coated in armor so don't go down without a fight. Seriously, I don't know if it's a skill issue, but these guys kicked my ass. Symbiotes feel like Insomniac invested a lot of time into a full faction that ultimately give us very little return because they're only in the game for a total of 2 hours. And yet, they are as fully formed as the hunters are. They're wriggly little bastards, making air combos harder because they can swing away if you hold them there for too long. They're awkward to differentiate because the game resorts to simple color coding. Yellow or standard, pink or ranged, green or quick, I don't know, they're annoying though. Especially with stuff like the green symbiotes, camera issues appear because the monsters are so sprightly. Spidey 2's combat brings the camera closer in, especially for parries, and there were times when the camera spun in, out, and shook it all about so much that I lost my sense of place. Because there are innocent people trapped beneath the goo, these fights are typically tougher because they can technically resurrect if you don't finish them off. Thankfully, that's where the Sonic Blast comes in. Boom. Symbiotes even get custom finishers, unique from the Hunters or the Flame, where we see Pete or Miles rip them out of the goo. The third act is far from perfect, in fact I would argue it's downright weak compared to the quality elsewhere, but you can't argue there's love and care put into the symbiotes as a full faction. If the stolen information is to be believed, that chunk was going to be much longer with more variables to consider, and it's a shame that such a deep group of enemies are relegated to such little playtime. In fact, it's in the side activities that they make a splash. Much like Clark Kent and Superman, I chose to have Pete play up his awkwardness in front of everyone else who doesn't know he's Spider-Man. As Spider-Man, he's confident and can say all of the things he wishes he could say as Peter. What's funny is that he's actually 3 different characters: Spidey, Peter Parker to everyone else, and the Peter Parker in his own head. Peter isn't just wearing a mask as Spidey, even the Peter he has to be to everyone in his life is a mask as well. The times he talks to himself, I consider to be the closest to the real Peter.
I thought you said this was a startup.
Yeah, I was hoping for something a little less... this?
Here's a list of some of the things we do in Spider-Man 2 that have nothing to do with feeling like Spider-Man. Riding a bike, playing basketball, playing as Mary Jane Watson, DJing, tracking objects in radar mode, whack-a-mole, playing as Spider-Bot, flying a drone through some hoops, spraying graffiti, shooting water pistols, atom puzzles, hex gene puzzles, shooting holograms as a bee drone. Those last 3 are introduced to the Emily May Foundation. A hawthorn tree and May blossoms greet Peter in the entrance hall. Greenery and plant life colour the space, with projects ranging from CRISPR to saving the bees to eco-friendly roofing materials. This isn't a lab, or at least not the sort of lab Pete was expecting. It's an exhibition, open to the public. Exhibits explain the work the EMF is doing to laymen. It shows a different side to Spider-Man's focus on the future. This series almost always has a downside to tech. The weaponry of the Hunters, Otto Octavius's arms, the exosuits that empower villains like Scorpion or Rhino, but the Emily May Foundation highlights the good side of futurism, something the Spider-Man of the comics has carefully considered. Yuri Lowenthal elevates our time here. Wandering around B exhibits as Pete is hardly what you're powering your console for, but it's hard not to feel Pete's infectious enthusiasm as he basks in the nerdy, scientific goodness. Miles texts us, saying he has intel on the Hunters and, not for the last time, Pete blows him off. He worries that he can't balance Emily May with his spider duties. Can he save the world without his suit? What does a hero look like? According to Harry, they're going to heal the world. Maybe heal your fashion sense first, Harry. A cardigan and jumper. It's the middle of May. All of this was funded by Norman Osborn, a gift to his son to be managed and run however he sees fit. Rumours abound that this is part nepotism and part Oscorp's rebrand after Devil's Breath. That might be true, but his love for his son is undoubtable, a distinct separation from the Norman Osborn of the comics who sees Harry as nothing more than a nuisance. Dr. Kurt Connors works here, hired by Norman to keep a watchful eye on Harry while pursuing his own form of redemption after turning into the Lizard. Dr. Young teaches us about bee predators. Hey, did you know spiders are bee predators? Every scientist Pete meets in Emily May wears the same comfortable smile, written with the same sugary sweetness that sloshes around our main cast. You'll be a real asset here, Dr. Foster grins. Join us, Pete. Join us. On my first playthrough, I gave the game too much credit. I thought this tone was all purposeful to foreshadow Venom later. Pete entering into the hive mind of Emily May, a foundation covering up a dark secret with staff and employees threatening to rip Pete out of the spider suit and make him an everyday schmuck, employee of Oscorp. But in reality, this is all played with sincerity. The super nice people are just super nice. Emily May only hires the super nice because Harry is super nice, and even Norman is being actually super nice, and nice, we're all nice here. Just like how they were implemented in the first title, science minigames aren't necessary to make me care about Emily May or show Pete's science side. They're not a pacing reset. We get that and drink it all up from the performances and environmental storytelling on show. Emily May is this game's feast. We care because Peter cares. When it comes to the open world, the Emily May activities are trudging and tedious. If anything, they put me at odds with Pete's desire to give up the spider and throw himself into the Foundation. Because of the blistering pace, there's only one open world opportunity before the hunters kidnap Martin Lee and Scorpion. We've crammed a lot in here. Fans wanted a game where we play in New York as both Spider-Men, and Act 1 gives us that in spades before the black suit takes hold. But what are we doing in New York while the story hurtles along? We'll look at the substantial quests in a later part, but let's whip out our checklist for now. Do you fancy watering some plants?
Would be counterproductive if I drowned all the plants.
Do you fancy fishing?
That's one slippery sample secured.
Do you fancy being a bee?
I'm like a bee real estate agent.
The Emily May Foundation replaces Harry's research stations from the first game and makes them worse. Gone are the wide array of traversal challenges like swinging through a storm, dodging lightning. Now, we're riding a bike through Central Park. Now, we're learning about the intricacies of bee habitats. 3 of these missions involve playing as a bee drone. Because the tasks themselves are mind-numbing and don't involve Spider-Man, they don't feel like elements of being a hero, they feel like PSAs, the moral on a Saturday morning cartoon. Save the bees, save the plants, save the fish. I'm all for eco-Spidey, but the activities are swaggerless and make me miss the days of precisely swinging through data streams. I think I could forgive Emily May and shrug it off as a tedious checklist if traversal challenges appeared elsewhere, but they don't, at least not in a way that's challenging or involves web swinging.
Don't worry, brother. I will do what you could not.
Somebody at Insomniac saw the underwhelming Hush side quest from Batman Arkham City and thought, that sure was a satisfying way to tie off a side mission, let's do that, but with some single-minded traversal instead. Some of Kraven's drones are haphazardly buzzing around rooftops. Pete and Miles need to catch them, harvest their data, and it all ultimately leads to Dmitry Smerdyakov, aka the Chameleon and Kraven's half-brother. Or rather, it leads to Dmitry's penthouse, and an agonizing tease for a sequel or DLC we never got. Chameleon is the first supervillain Spider-Man fought on the page. Sort of. Amazing Spider-Man 1 gives us a chameleon that isn't particularly super, he's just got a belt full of wigs and mustaches. It wasn't until issue 2 with the Vulture that Spidey met a foe that was a physical threat. He wears a spider suit, tries to steal some missile plans, and despite Pete eventually webbing him up, he pushes the wall crawler to tears by joining J. Jonah Jameson in turning the public against him. Nothing turns out right, Pete sobs on the last page. I wish I had never gotten my superpowers. Unraveling the mystery of Chameleon involves web wing challenges. We soar through an extended wind tunnel, occasionally dodging missiles until we've scanned all the data. It's honestly more difficult to leave the wind tunnel than to stay in it, so the challenge is dampened. This is as close as the game ever gets to testing our movement. Swinging tasks like Screwball, Taskmaster, or Pete's holo training are gone in favor of the wingsuit and the wind tunnels. A disappointing task with a disappointing ending.
Look at this, a spider hero. We're all saved.
Hi.
The closest we get to actual traversal challenges come in the form of spider bots that replace the backpacks and the time capsules. Depending on who you ask, this is either a disastrous tie-in to the Spider-Verse movies, apparently this bartender was in Spider-Verse 2 and then got cut, or a tease for a live service game that was mercifully binned before it could devour Insomniac the same way that poisonous genre devoured Rocksteady. My Suicide Squad critique is below. Spider bots are the worst collectathon in the series. They're not like the backpacks that lay out crumbs of Pete's past to flesh out the history of the world. They're not like time capsules that occasionally came with obstacles and developed Miles and Finn's relationship. They are pretty looking spider bots, based off characters across the Spider-Verse that sit on rooftops or very occasionally hover in the air. Those airborne ones are where the fun lies. They're awkwardly positioned so you need to use the new tools Spidey 2 gives you to maneuver up high and web it up as you go. If we are lucky, we'll get comments like, "This one looks really high tech." There's no lore, no explanation of what these spider people are all about, or even a comic that we can find them in. It would be the perfect opportunity to accredit some of the incredible comic book creators out there who spent 60 years fleshing out Spider-Man's catalogue, but there's nothing. No mention of Jason Latour and Robbie Rodriguez, the creators of Spider-Gwen. No naming of Peter David and Rick Leonardi, who brought Spider-Man 2099 to life. A waste of time, resources, and opportunities. This part's starting to bum me out. What else is there?
Wish there was more I could do. Maybe I can ask some lawyer friends to help Marco with visitation rights.
What did happen to Flint Marco to make him explode into a sandstorm? Luckily, Spider-B is on the case, collecting pieces of his memory through sand minion combat challenges. Tying back to the theme of redemption, Sandman was just trying to protect his family. When the hunters attacked him, he lost control of his powers. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. It's a clever way of bringing back the sand minions after the tutorial because they're a cool enemy faction to battle, especially because they react uniquely to electricity, crystallizing and shattering into pieces. Even though Miles' bioelectricity lends him best to these combat challenges, the way the quest ends has more weight and power if you see it through as Pete. It shows off his big heart and how it's not just his powers that make him a hero. Even after Sandman's rampage caused him to lose his job, he helps Flint by piecing the crystal together and delivering it to his daughter, Kimia, a small piece of her father kept close.
What is it? Just some old tech I gotta get off the street. Stashed it by a decommissioned Roxxon lab near Central Park.
Old Uncle Prowler has officially given up the suit and claws. Again, he and Miles are still on uneven terms after he sold the little spider out to Roxxon, but he's working hard to reintegrate into the family. In a moment of vulnerability, Miles asks him about Martin Lee and Aaron tells him that sometimes you've got to push the past away so you can make room for the future. He is the second family member who'll tell him that, and while it reflects off Miles' desire to get a hold of Lee, it ties nicely into that theme of redemption as well. You've got to come to terms with the things you've done and the people you've hurt and move past it, or you'll never better yourself. The missions themselves are simple. Prowler hideouts are strewn across the city, and if we find them all, Aaron promises there's some funky new tech in it for us. Character is informed by side quest because we get to see, we get to feel, and we get to usurp Aaron's many hideouts and security measures. Back in the day, he mastered New York City. It's any wonder that Pete didn't come to blows with him during his stint in the suit, a history I wish was at least touched on. From using chain lightning to link junction boxes to navigating vent lasers, opening passage isn't just about clicking detective vision anymore. It's about holding down L2 to look for a signal. That sounds like a criticism, but that's a much more tactile way of hunting for something than spot the golden box. It returns a few times in both side stuff and the main story. I just wish we relied less on visor tech when playing as Miles, because the end of his solo game culminated in him ripping off Pete's tech and embracing his unique power set. Giving him the same visor mechanics as Pete feels like a step backward. It's where ambition gets in the way of characterization again. When the final hideout is uncovered, our gameplay reward is a new move specific to Miles, the Prowler Strike, which makes our first melee attack when camouflaged more powerful. But it's the writing that stands out. We learn that Rio Morales co-signed on a lease to an upstairs apartment. Uncle Aaron is back in the family, taking his reformation seriously. Miles carries his father's binary moral code, so he immediately assumes Aaron is preparing to rob them and needs to have that fear dismantled. It's a gorgeous beat and a suitable epilogue to Aaron's role in the solo game.
This never gets easier.
The symbiote nests are neat. What more do you want from me? They are. Tendrils shoot into the sky in the third act, and Peter or Miles need to leap in and do a tower defense mission until a sonic bomb can destroy them. The main problem is these nests are the majority of the main campaign by the time you do the third act, so it's hard for them to feel worth the effort as side content. If both Spidermen were incorporated at once, it would add a lot, so the size of the task could feel grander because it requires both heroes to conquer.
What is it now? I could have come with you. You are not needed. I'm never needed, it seems. I think you did not want to be outclassed.
Because I am a miserable bastard, I have a couple of gripes with the Hunter bases, but even with my complaints, I think they're a standout. Spider Bee does whatever a Spider Bee can, buzzing inside Hunter camps, whipping back guys like a champ. Look out, it's a Spider Bee. There are a handful of these to clear out, sizable arenas that let us flex our meager stealth muscles or go in swinging. As Miles, I crept through, quiet as a whisper. As Pete, I started blasting. They are wholly unique with environments and settings that make up the best level design in the game's catalogue of stealth. One was a drone factory that meant sneaking was extra tricky because loads of Talons would fly around and land next to us, using their scanner to disable our abilities. Before you can uncover one, you need to find 3 Hunter blinds, hidden outposts on rooftops where Kraven's people are preparing. They're covered in optic camouflage, so unless you're looking really closely, you'll swing by these rooftops without noticing anything, strengthening that all-important feeling that Kraven's cult is warping New York and turning it into their own personal hunting ground. Each blind exposes a unique part of a base, like a relay that we can sabotage to stop reinforcements, or armoured vehicles that can be disabled to stop heavy artillery. I love how this introduces an element of planning and preparation to these infiltrations, but it's all covered by a thin veneer of artificiality. See this? This is a Hunter base before I clear out the 3 corresponding blinds. It's empty, there's nothing here. I can swing inside, buzz around, pollinate, and no alarm will be raised. This is the base after I clear out the blinds, with laser wires and snipers and crates of ammunition for our baddies. I wish that we could stumble across these bases without doing the blinds, entirely by accident. Or perhaps after just one blind, it would ping the base on our map, and then the other outposts would be entirely optional to find weaknesses that make it easier. The game world changes after you find the third blind to just magically manifest a base that should have always been there. At launch, they also couldn't be replayed the same way Fisk, Demon, Prisoner, Sable, Hammerhead, Olympus, Underground, or Roxxon bases could in the past games. A damn shame, and say it with me, a missed opportunity. The narrative throughline is a disappointment too. The mystery of Kraven's family, a mystery that joins Fisk's side missions from Miles Morales as a mystery that isn't really a mystery. We should take out these bases in case Kraven's family show up, Ganke warns, and then after doing all the bases it turns out that they were never a threat in the first place because Kraven killed them all.
Scorpion, Martin Lee, Black Cat. This Kraven guy's putting together quite the team.
It's as Peter investigates the blinds and bases that he starts to grow concerned. When he first hears the name Kraven, he shrugs it off, just some new lunatic in his city. But the Hunters are cultish and disturbed. We better start preparing. When I first played Peter Parker, I was in my 20s. I treated it like Hamlet, thinking, I've lost my parents, I'm an orphan. If you're going to really step into that in a real way, that's heavy psychological, emotional stuff. For me, there are lots of young boys that are going to be watching this. I wanted to offer something that had soul. I wanted to offer something that felt real and relatable and complicated. Fun and joyful as well, but also I wanted to honor what it is to be an orphan teenager. I wanted to really dive into that and think about what it would do to the heart of a person and their trust for people. Before the credits roll, Kraven will send his people out to hunt Sandman, Black Cat, Lizard, both Spider-Men, Venom, Vulture, Rhino, Shocker, Electro, Mr. Negative, and Scorpion. He's studying them. This Kraven is all about preparation. He's replicated Scorpion's armor, has studied Martin Lee's blood. He's inoculated himself to Scorpion's venom. No, not that venom. No, not that venom either. That's just like his comic book counterpart. The preparation. The potions and antidotes and chemicals. The Kraven of the page got his strength from a potion stolen from a witch doctor. He scratched Spidey with a poison that made him weak and dizzy when he appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 15, and he watched carefully from rooftops before finally making his move. Oh, and yes, despite what you might have heard, he relies heavily on tech. "There's no hope for you, Spider-Man," he barks. "My escape-proof cuffs get stronger every minute." People really enjoyed Kraven when he first appeared. Just take this letter Todd Freeman sent to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. I was worried about Kraven the Hunter, as he was so sure of himself, so sly, so clever, strong, and handsome. Wait a minute, on second thought, he wasn't so handsome. He was fast-moving. Boy, that story was good enough to keep anyone awake. Man, they do not do letters pages like this anymore. Despite the fanfare, it wasn't until John DeMatteis wrote Kraven's Last Hunt that he got a story worthy of his reputation. Unless you're a hardcore Spidey fan, that is likely the Kraven story that you know. In it, he beats Peter, buries him alive, and wears his suit so he can feel what it's like to become the Spider. It's dark, it's deeply philosophical, and it shows a spiritual side to Kraven that was only hinted at before and has now defined him. In DeMatteis' own words, "I had no interest in Kraven. In fact, I always thought he was one of the most generic, uninteresting villains in the Spider-Man gallery. But buried in the Marvel Universe was one intriguing fact. Kraven was Russian. Why should that excite me so? One word. Dostoevsky. The Russian soul, as exposed in Dostoevsky's novels, was really the universal soul. It was my soul. In an instant, I understood Sergei Kravenov." DeMatteis gives us Kraven the Beast, Kraven the Man, and Kraven the Hunter in one story, and Insomniac brings the spirit of his last hunt into Spider-Man 2, while missing the depth. I love the idea of this version of Kraven. The spirituality is there, the philosophy is there, the Beast and the Man are there. I just wish he was given more time to breathe, and I wish he actually hunted.
They said you were a killer. Imagine my disappointment.
As great as the Hunters are as a video game enemy faction, they take away from Kraven as a hunter. He kills Rhino, Vulture, Electro, Shocker, and Scorpion in this game, and only one of those deaths happen on screen. The rest, mockingly, are found through optional collectibles during a Mary Jane Watson mission. You can beat this game and not know he killed any of them. Tape recordings are the closest the game gives to a send-off. Especially in the case of Rhino, these are characters we've gotten to know over 2 games with excellent, albeit surface level, characterization that earned on-screen deaths. Vulture ended up being a Sinister Six member who had perhaps 15 lines of dialogue, had to share his boss fight in the first game, and then vanished from the series. It feels cheap, it feels like time ran out, and it feels like Kraven isn't a hunter, he's a gladiator. When he kills Scorpion, it's in a gladiator arena. Later, his cult brings Martin Lee and Miles to that same arena and forces them to fight, deeming them not worthy of his time. Aside from his introductory cutscene, not once do we actually see Kraven the Hunter hunt. His men do all the work for him. The game plays it off like Kraven will only battle enemies who can best his warriors. He's dying. Cancer is eating away at his husk, and he's determined to not let something so banal defeat him. He wants something worthy. He's not going to waste his energy on super beings who can't even beat his henchmen. While that's narratively sound, it's not narratively satisfying. Kraven's attack on New York isn't a hunt. When looking at the raft attack, or the lizard rampage, or the Black Cat sequence, it's a chase where he is barely present. So let's talk about the chase. Let's talk about movement.
Little Spider wants to play, huh?
Traversal is the only game pillar that does not take anything away from Spider-Man 1 or Spider-Man Miles Morales. Combat minimizes gadgets and changes the focus and Venom economy. Stealth strips back little details like dangling web bombs. But web swinging has further mechanical intricacy, and the spectacle has been cranked to 11. Learning that Kraven's next target is Felicia Hardy, aka Black Cat, Miles tracks her down and tries to warn her, but Cat is 2 steps ahead. She's stolen the Wand of Watum from Doctor Strange, and we need to chase her across the city, using that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart tech to zoom through portals and careen across global locations like the Arctic. It's more pizzazz than challenge, but with pizzazz this good, who cares? It's not just portals we can zoom through, it's ruined buildings, tunnels, fire escapes, water towers. Parts of the city's geometry now lend themselves to even more fluid and natural web swinging than ever before. I was wowed by Spider-Man 1's animation change for scaling fire escapes, and somehow Insomniac took movement 10 steps further. We can skim water now, adopting that surface tension Pete led a lesson on for the 5 minutes he was a teacher. Miles' swinging still carries the cockiness of his youth, but it's less wild now. The flapping arms are gone, but the expressiveness remains intact, with him pulling out his phone at the bottom of a dive and twirling his body like an acrobat as he turns into a new swing. A year of experience in the suit has given him a desire to show off. That's inevitable in anyone who wears the suit, but especially with Miles, because of his affinity for performing, it lends to characterization in minor but fun ways. Pete's swinging is as energetic and free as Miles was in his solo game, whipping out a Rubik's Cube mid-flight. The development team were always proud of their physics-first system, and while there was, and still is, a clever allusion to that so interruptions are limited, we can see those physics hard at work in unlikely places that could have easily been ignored. Like here, where an enclosed street forms a wind tunnel that speeds us up. On a grander scale, web swinging is now the fastest it's ever been, with a speed cap that has dramatically risen and opportunities to increase it even further. We can throw the spider, extend airtime, and point launch opportunities can be accessed from far away. Web zipping still looks and feels awkward. He's zapped to a surface and Spider-Man pauses before transitioning into a wall run or a leap off. We also still can't extend or shorten our webs during swings. Instead, a lot of the traversal tweaks come back to one major shift in focus. The web wings are the most substantial change. New York is bigger than before, with a full river separating two islands, and with that growth comes a new movement opportunity that can make New York feel big without being too big. That's mainly because we can get from one end to the other in a matter of minutes. There's a risk that comes with adding the web wings. What if they replace web swinging as a preferred means of getting around? I know I wasn't alone when I bristled a little at the reveal trailer. What fans asked for, what we wanted, was more depth given to the web swinging, not a flying mechanic. Well, it turns out that was a dumb thing to worry about. The web wings work best when we treat them as an additional option to the thwipping. A way of gaining more height, more speed, and more momentum. Without careful movement or wind tunnels, they'll rapidly lose their height and speed, forcing us to transition back into web swinging for that Spider-Man goodness. The wind tunnels are a distraction that overcompensate. The first couple of times you glide into them, there's a thrill to swooshing up an avenue and blasting into new heights, but they don't make you feel like Spider-Man, and most importantly of all, we don't do anything in them. They're almost always in a straight line, so there's hardly any directional input, and the green rings that herald their arrival are a holographic interruption to how gorgeous the city is. The speed they give us isn't needed when the game gives us ways to manually and thoughtfully boost Spider-Man. Air jump gives us the height, and air dash gives us the speed. Abilities gloriously carried over from Miles Morales that are strangled by the game's emphasis on cooldowns, so we can't do 3 in a row anymore. Slingshots give us a speedy start, and super slingshots give us context-based supersonic speed that can clear the map in under a minute if combined with their other abilities. A headfirst dive lets us loop-de-loop and spring off, a huge addition that I wish went even further, letting us circle around more than once if we achieve the right speed. It seems like the dive is locked to one speed, no matter how fast you're going, so there's awkward beats where Spidey is blasting across the city and then slows down as he drops. And give me a sec here, what happens if we just let him drop? Haha, the saying goes that nobody hates Spider-Man more than Spider-Man fans. Nobody likes watching him suffer and lose and grieve and hurt more than the people who buy the comics. I don't subscribe to that. I think there's a difference between struggle and suffering, and you just need to look at how upset people still are to this day about Pete and MJ's marriage dying, but when it comes to fall damage, that is certainly the case. Here's footage of me doing a loop-de-loop at high speed and crashing into a building and dying. Game of the year, 10 out of 10. I love watching this. I love that there's finally a toggle in the menu that breaks Pete's legs and fractures Miles' skull if we let them drop too far. It keeps web swinging accessible while giving challenge to those of us who asked for it. There's less leniency if you drop the toggle to 0, and it groups the Spider-Man closer to buildings as they swing by, so you can't cling to one web for as long anymore. It makes swinging more involved, alternating between the web wings, the wall run, the air dash, air jump, dive, swing, jump release means you're constantly considering where to steer Spider-Man to give you the best chance of pulling off speed and finesse. The geometry of the city is more complex than ever before, with more density to the buildings, so playing with all your options and leaning into the physics system rather than away from it means you start considering the city as a gigantic jungle gym.
Here.
Focus. Think Eiffel Tower.
Black Cat escapes the hunters. Her and Miles use the Wand of Watum to open a door to Paris where she'll get to retire with a girlfriend who may or may not exist. Just ask the Saudi Arabian version. Taking a beat after she leaves, Miles tries to use the wand to find Martin Lee, but he doesn't get far.
Show me Lee.
We owe you one, the note from Strange says. Apparently not, Act 3 of the game replies. I never liked Superman that much because I was like, yo, this dude can't die. It's too easy. Batman's pretty fly. He's a close second, just because he doesn't really have powers. He's just a justice-driven vigilante. Spider-Man is the best because you just don't know who he is and he's funny and he's poor. I understand Spider-Man a lot on that level. He's just trying to make it. That's the great part about the Spider-Man costume. He can be anybody. Spider-Man could be a girl. Spider-Man could be an old man. You don't know. So I just tried to be as me as possible, because you're always going to bring it back to yourself when you watch the show.
Guys, this is my best friend Harry. He just got back from overseas, and he's starting up a new research foundation.
You mean we're starting up a new research foundation?
It's date night on Coney Island. Pete, MJ and Harry see the sights, reminisce on the past, and despite third wheeling, Harry takes a deep breath and announces that it's the best night of his life. After looking down the barrel of death, even the mundane seems exciting, but he's holding on to a secret. Pete is high on officially signing on to the Emily May Foundation. The future is looking bright. Across the park, Genki tries to take Miles' mind off Martin Lee and his college essay. Can't forget about the essay, and when they bump into the trio, MJ points out that maybe Pete should check in on Miles. He's been so focused on Harry that the two Spider-Men haven't found time to decompress in the wake of Kraven's attack. Thankfully, Miles has found a distraction. Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, has rebranded. He's no longer the supervillain of Spider-Man's past, now he's a soft-spoken inventor, bringing his mastery of illusions to the general public in the form of theme park rides. So while the gang blow off some steam on the island, let's ride the ghost train over to the more substantial side quests.
Come one, come all, and experience the future!
Out of the 4 layered side missions, 3 are dedicated to Miles and 1 is dedicated to Pete. The Flame, Brooklyn Visions, the Harlem Culture Center, and Mysterio. We're not saving the best till last here, we're tossing Mysterio right to the front of the queue. The introduction is stellar for a start. Through Mysterio, Miles thinks about his hopes and dreams, the person he wants to be outside of the suit. The illusion reads him and conjures a bustling nightclub where we play DJ. There are no sounds of the city this time, no tolling bells or plopping water. It's an opportunity to revel in the music and feel Miles' love for it, mainly because the DJ theme slaps. I wish we could do this again. Eventually, the good times are interrupted when a virus infects Quentin's house of fun. Demons manifest, invading Miles' hopeful outlook for the future and reminding us that he's still stuck firmly in the past, smothered by the long shadow of death his father casts. The dance floor lights flash red when we get hit. They change in time with our beatdowns. The whole sequence proves that we don't need to be facing a citywide disaster to find the spectacle. Sometimes it can come in a funky house of mirrors. There's an initial air of suspicion around Quentin just because of what we know from the comics. For general audiences, there wasn't much of a gap between Jake Gyllenhaal's turn in Spider-Man Far From Home and this game, so there are expectations that Insomniac gladly play with. Nasir Dalal, fresh off his turn as Boda Kuna in Jedi Survivor, hams up Quentin's reformed villain angle, giving it a sense of artificiality when, in reality, it's completely sincere. Through the performance alone, we think he might be a baddie when he's just a bit hopeless. It's actually his producers, Betsy and Cole, who are manipulating things. Mysterio arrived in the comics 2 issues before Kraven did. Amazing Spider-Man number 13. Just like Chameleon before him, Mysterio frames Spider-Man, using his illusions and suction cups to make it seem like he's robbing people. Pete even visits a psychiatrist because he worries he's committing crimes in his sleep. When he finally arrives, Mysterio tries to paint himself as a hero. He claims the big dome on his head is to protect his family from the underworld. It's a fun introduction action, mainly because Mysterio fully embraces the role of pantomime villain. Just because Quentin Beck is innocent doesn't mean we don't get to have fun with those classic Mysterio beats. His costume is gorgeous, with the cape being sacrificed for a long flowing coat and scarf to add the flair. But it's in the gameplay that his villainy steams through. The structure of the quest is free-flowing. Numerous Mysteriums have popped up across the city for us to jump into at our leisure, trying to get a new high score. They fill the role of combat challenges that Taskmaster brought in the first game, but with a Mysterio twist. Ghost trains that we need to avoid and can use as a trap for bad guys. Gigantic mystic hands that come crashing out of the ground to smoosh us. Sometimes Mysterio will even jump into the fight himself, launching skulls and cackling to add freneticism to the pace. The real standout is his boss fight. Miles gets sucked into a gigantic snow globe, fighting a mini Mysterio while locked in the grasp of a gigantic one. We throw plastic cars at him, swing around models of skyscrapers, and the fight's broken up with numerous phases, separated by a spectacle chase inspired by the MCU's depiction of the mirror dimension. Just because Insomniac are holding up a magnifying glass to Quentin's redemptive arc doesn't mean they've missed the chance to give us a Mysterio worth remembering.
Mom, do you need me to go?
Didn't you just finish telling me how busy you are?
Yeah, but I always have time for my community.
The Harlem Culture Center resets the pace, reminding us of Miles' role as Harlem's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. The center is preparing an exhibit to showcase Harlemite musicians, and some goons have stolen priceless instruments. It's the game's way of bringing Rio into the tale without distracting too much from its breakneck speed. Spider-Man helps and is helped by his community, making New York feel fuller because we get to return to and build off our relationships to these minor characters that we met in the last game. It retreads gameplay we've seen elsewhere, fighting thugs on a rooftop, a car chase, an interminable Spider-Bot mission because I guess Miles has all of Pete's toys now, ironic for a quest commenting on gentrification and appropriation. It turns out that Darren, an investor in the community center, is actually behind the whole thing. Big twist. His father was a producer behind many of these musicians, so he thinks their instruments are his birthright. The small, personal scope complements the humongous scale of the main campaign. The through line of Miles learning that funk is the origin of hip-hop does feel like pandering. I'm whiter than webbing and even I knew that, but getting to attend a gala afterward, reading snippets of stories about real-life musicians like Charlie Parker is a gorgeous, intimate detail that re-establishes the warmth of the Morales family unit. And it also shows us that Rio is taking her duties as councilwoman seriously, even if she needs a little Spidey help every now and again.
Everything okay?
Lance! He was kidnapped! By Midtown.
That warmth continues with the Brooklyn Visions questline. 3 short missions reintroduce Haley, who Miles briefly made googly eyes at in his solo game. Because the whole franchise relies heavily on phone calls for its character work, there so we can flesh out the world without ripping the player away from all the fun web swinging, there's a lovely detail where Haley uses text-to-speech because she's deaf. Bonding time with Haley is much needed, so having her be our girl in the chair for these quests connects the two. She doesn't share nearly enough screen time with Miles to make the moment where he confesses his feelings for her have any weight, but her inclusion here is heartfelt. Some kids lose their senior project and we need to chase their drone around the school. Miles agrees to help a kid propose to his prom date, and he helps his fellow students track down their school mascot, stolen by that pesky Midtown lot. In a game that goes to dark places, the BV missions bring the cuteness. It would have been all too easy for Insomniac to write in that the game takes place during summer vacation, but we're reminded of Miles' youth and his place in school through quirky missions that have us do mindless fluff like laser puzzles and syncing up an elaborate proposal. Nothing says Spider-Man more than beating on goons while doing a college interview over the phone. It reminds me of the youthful energy that came with his original run in the Ultimate Comics.
How long you been tracking these guys?
Few weeks. Heard rumors for a while. They leave bodies in their wake. They care a lot about the Crimson Hour, whatever that is.
The hot new club in Hell's Kitchen?
The Flame is Pete's only layered side quest, but it's by far the most substantial. A solid mystery, a gruesome tone, a fantastic boss fight, a unique faction, and a satisfying follow-up for Yuri Watanabe's character greet us as we dive into the blood-curdling world of an arson cult. The Flame's prophet is claiming that dark days are coming, the Crimson Hour, where demons will take to New York streets and a false savior will fail to protect them. Sounds an awful lot like the symbiote invasion of Act 3, which would be impressive impressive if the prophecy wasn't vague as hell and marred in brainwashing and kidnapping. It's clearly nonsense. Greek gods connect the thread, scribbled symbology acts as signifiers. Daily events for a superpowered New York like Sandman's attack are used as signs an apocalypse is nigh. Yuri Watanabe has now donned her costume as Wraith, a look that might well be the worst adaptation in Insomniac's whole franchise. The full face mask is gone. The yellow ropes and ribbons have been scrapped in favour of a deadly, sharp Kusarigama. While a leather jacket and short crop of hair is certainly realistic for a cop turned vigilante, it reads more like Karen stepped out of Hot Topic than a ruthless, bloodthirsty killer. Yuri's costume might be amiss, but the character work is excellent. She spent months hunting the Flame. She's run into him before, and his cruelty is unlike anything she's seen before. She's introduced to us by pulling out a lighter and searing the skin of a cultist to check his tattoo. It's brutal, while the activities we physically undertake with her show the good woman and true hero under the violence. 4 quests keep returning to saving people, rescuing hostages, and deactivating bombs.
Fool's beacon himself, as I prophesied. No!
The Flame is wholly unique to the game. This isn't a group from the comics, but their prevalence for fire is a neat red herring for comics fans. Who's behind all of this? Molten Man? No, we were too focused on the element. We should have been focused on the color palette. Cletus Cassidy is the Flame, the infamous serial killer who, in the comics, eventually becomes the red symbiote Carnage. Lending to the pun, Yuri sees Red and tries to kill him, and Spider-Man stops her. Cue boss fight. You're just a man in a costume playing hero, Yuri spits, summoning some of the game's best writing. You care more about being good than doing good. How true is that of our Peter? He tries to shake it off, but it cuts deep, especially when he dons the black suit. Yuri's tricky. To the backdrop of a blazing inferno, she uses her agility to hold her own against Spider-Man. What makes her unique is her ability to dodge our attacks, so a lunge or smackdown isn't always reliable, and just like other bosses, her many phases color an exhausting fight where the structure of the thing highlights the emotion. You might be listening to all of this and wondering why I've put the Flame at the bottom of this list of quests. Surely it's better than helping a culture center or a high school prom, right? And it is, until its closing seconds where Cletus Cassidy's true identity is revealed.
It shall bring truth, judgment, and carnage.
Boo! At the end of 2023, Insomniac was hit by a cyber attack by the group Reseda. I struggle to call this a leak because a leak brings to mind a bucket full of holes where stuff accidentally slips out. This was a hack. This was theft. This was a crime that led to numerous Insomniac employees having their personal information released. What was revealed from the attack was a host of DLC planned for Spider-Man 2. More suits, more collectibles, a Beetle questline, and ultimately, Carnage. Either because of the cyber attack or some internal restructuring, this DLC has since been cancelled. It turns out that the Flame, much like the Chameleon, doesn't get a resolution. Spidey and Wraith form a tenuous alliance to stop his bombs, and in a dire moment, Cletus appears, scoops up a piece of the symbiote, and skips away, leaving dangling threads in his wake. The Carnage reveal is powerful, but it's rendered hollow when the game doesn't follow up on it in any meaningful way, and now what he and this quest represents is a big sign saying, don't leave stuff for DLC. As of the time of this video, Reseda still hasn't been brought to justice.
What are those things coming out of you? I think it's my treatment.
In the time it's taken for us to wangle through these side quests, Pete and MJ have ridden the Speed Demon roller coaster, copped a fancy new hat, and the hunters have attacked. It's a disaster. Tombstone is captured, Coney Island is destroyed, and Peter is humbled when he realizes innocent people would have died if it wasn't for Harry Osborn. Harry is wearing a symbiote, and it saved the day. Spider-Man wasn't enough. He claims it's an exosuit. He doesn't fully understand it, and he's running on trust from Dr. Connors and his father. Whatever it is, it's the reason he's healthy, and the two friends are united in having superpowers. It's exciting. Both men are thrilled that they don't need to keep secrets anymore. Pete blows Miles off a third time to hang with Harry, and the pair jaunt over to the Emily May Foundation to study his new powers. The potential is breathtaking. They won't just heal the world, they could make it better. A better world for a better Spider-Man. I dreamed about playing Spider-Man, literally, and then it happened for 8 shows a week. More than any other superhero, there's so much focus on his humanity and hopefulness. Everyone has a shadow side, and Spider-Man does as well, but there's something uplifting about his story. In 2014, Glasgow, the city where I live, adopted a new brand as part of a citywide transformation to host the Commonwealth Games. People make Glasgow. Community initiatives were set up sharing the name. New funding was pumped into the city to help with restoration projects. A huge pink sign stating the slogan was erected near George Square. If you step off the train into Glasgow, this is one of the first things you'll see. It's corny and hopeful and wonderful, playing off the Kevin Bridges joke that it's the world's friendliest city. You might get the shite kicked out of you, but you'll get directions to the hospital. Ha ha ha, great joke. It gets funnier every time an English person says it to me. But what does this have to do with Spider-Man, Daniel asks. Well, Insomniac's New York feels like home. It feels like Glasgow, and its people make it.
What the hell happened here?
We were just doing some experiments.
Experimenting with Harry in the Emily May Foundation sounds like a bad porno and feels like experimenting with Otto in Spider-Man 1. Testing Harry's powers reminds Pete of the good old days while introducing yet another parallel. The next morning, when Norman Osborn visits and sees the wrecked office, he doesn't think anything of it. His son's happy. That's all that matters. Pete reads Norman's face. He clearly wants a private word with Harry, so out into the city we go to give them their space. If Spider-Man 1 gave us the Big Apple, Spider-Man 2 gives us a whole damn tree. While it would have been simpler to just use the New York they built for the first game and then remastered for the PS5, Insomniac rebuilt the city from the ground up with 2 extra boroughs. An expensive choice that might explain the game's insane $300 million budget. It's through the Daily Bugle's Robbie Robertson that we were invited to zoom in on some specifics. Rooftop tennis, someone auditioning for Broadway, a chess champion playing a young protege, dueling buskers, a famous hummus shop, kinda funny filming their shirtless Spider-Man video, and hey look, it's beloved supervillain El Muerto, he's back. Each one is accompanied by a quick story by Robbie, reminiscing on his city and inviting us to look past the buildings and brickwork and peek into the lives of the people that live there. It's not always as banal as those examples. This is Spider-Man's New York, not my New York. People play rooftop frisbee with a Captain America pattern. Teo's bodega is under siege by his competitor, The Bodega, a rival using a generic name because it establishes the business as the one and only. After Miles became Harlem's protector, Teo turned his cat Spider-Man into a mascot, and The Bodega has copied him. A tiny group protests Oscorp, calling for Norman Osborn to be arrested after the Devil's Breath pandemic, but nobody is paying attention. It seems Osborn's vast wealth has let him wriggle out of jail, the public memory fading all too quickly. Sandman's hand sits on a beach and some students have turned it into the tent pole of a beach party. Outside of the photography quests, there's still stuff to see that renders Insomniac's New York unique. At the end of the game, Kraven's tiger bodyguard Dima gets relocated to the zoo and we can visit her. Mysterio billboards advertise his ill-fated Mysteriums. The Daily Bugle advertises the return of J. Jonah Jameson. The Danicast struggles to compete with its advertising but is putting up a noble fight. The Wakandan Embassy brings a unique animation for Miles, something people got upset about for some reason. And the Baxter Building is in its preliminary stages, with the Fantastic Four's logo painted on the rooftop. But it's not just Easter eggs. The city teems with franchise history. The Roxxon Plaza lies in ruins after Miles and Finn's battle at the end of his solo game. The Brooklyn Bridge is slowly being rebuilt, though it doesn't lead to Brooklyn, it's on the wrong side of the city. The graffiti that made Harlem shine in Miles' game returns with a vengeance, but is spread with more density across the full city to give it colour and life, even in the more industrial districts that could otherwise look like a wasteland of warehouses. My favourite is this piece of Norman Osborn. His lawyers might have protected him from prison, but some New Yorkers haven't forgotten. And does that look a little goblin-y to anyone else? In an interview with GLHF, Insomniac's core tech director Mike Fitzgerald said, "We have a whole cascade of different systems that come together to try and preserve detail up close. The mid-distance gives you that sense of the same detail without losing anything, and then at the far distance, trying to convince your brain that it's still seeing the same high detail stuff that far away. There's no magic trick or silver bullet. The rooftops are where the thrill is, but the city is alive on the ground, with population and traffic density that makes Spider-Man 1 look empty by comparison. The regular opportunities to see Miles and Peter out of the suit mean we get to experience a living, breathing New York, whether it's the Harlem Festival, the Brooklyn Vision School Fair with specific student interactions, or biking from one district to another. Even when the scope isn't as zoomed in as this, we have a Chinatown with Chinese shops you won't find elsewhere in the city, or a banking sector with plazas that never repeat. Brooklyn apartments have a specificity to their architecture and brickwork that makes them particular to Brooklyn. Crammed apartments on top of each other, fighting for air. Shop interiors are detailed with NPCs actively moving around inside them. Repeating cubic apartment rooms are still here, but they are much more rare and only if you're looking for them. Shop brands are replicated, but the buildings that they hang their signs from are different shapes and sizes, so the fingerprint of copy-pasting is absent, even if we just can't see it. Anyway, we've seen the sights for long enough. Black Cat tells us the hunters have taken Tombstone to a nearby foundry.
Harry? What are you doing here? Helping you out, Spider-Man. You're welcome, by the way.
I was hoping to do this quietly.
Eager to flex his muscles, Harry bursts in and joins Pete on his rescue mission. His version of the black suit is reminiscent of the Agent Venom look that Flash Thompson's donned in the comics, bulky without being monstrous. Warehouses and factories are video game staples by this point, but what we get here is a molten, mechanical monster of a space. Harry is reckless. The symbiote's comic book weakness to fire is absent here to keep its kryptonite simple later on. Pete wants to go in nice and quiet, pure stealth mode, but Harry saw how crap the stealth options are and decided combat was where the fun lies. If the symbiote enhances personal characteristics, it's feeding off Harry's desire for adventure now he's got his body back. Together, the two make a powerful, if untrained, hero. Tombstone is saved and the foundry is destroyed. A small blow to the hunters, but a big win for Spider-Man. Yet, that's not what's important. What's important is the big billow of smoke jetting out of the wrecked building and into the sky. This will remain for almost the rest of the game. The city evolves the same way the Spider-Men evolve, and what's gorgeous is that evolution comes in stages. Firefighters will dash to the scene and try to put out the blaze, and then midway through Act 2, they'll go, their job complete, leaving a derelict, rotting husk behind. The freighter and pier that was destroyed when the hunters attacked Martin Lee and Scorpion stays in the bay, slowly being repaired. An entire district is covered in sand after the Sandman fight, with ruined buildings opening web zip opportunities, and it'll gradually get cleaned up with each passing mission. By the end of the game, only a single pile is left, swept up near the damage control building. A few miles away, the Speed Demon roller coaster still lies in tatters. New York is beautiful, but it's constantly under siege. These changes remind us why New York needs a Spider-Man. Insomniac said that they had revised how activities were advertised to us while swinging around, keen not to over-rely on icons. For example, some fireworks blasting off a nearby rooftop herald a friendly neighborhood mission involving illegal fireworks. Small sandstorms show us that a Sandman mission is nearby. These are great, but I don't think the game can get away with claiming it's entirely dynamic in how it leads us to these things, especially because it scrapped the fun and unique interactions Spidey can have with NPCs, where on ground level they once ran up to us and told us about a radio tower or crime. There simply are icons on the map, we just need to be lucky enough to swing by them in the world. Hunter blinds, the chameleon's drones, prowler hideouts, they're just a handful of the quests that are hidden unless you get up close. It just encourages spamming the scan bar because the in-world signals never activate from far away. We're not dealing with pillars of smoke and a horizon line to head towards, we're dealing with intermittent pink pulses if we go near a building with a spider bot on it. With a widening of scale and an increase in density, the feel of New York has changed too. That apple tree has grown into a jungle, not just of concrete, but the natural world. Kraven's inclusion has brought the trees with him. His underblinds act as outposts showing his invisible grasp on the city, but there is a stark nature motif that runs through all of the environmental design. Whether that's the Emily May Foundation, the zoo, or the leafy green suburbs. Rooftop gardens are in abundance. More parks than ever before are planted between districts. Despite how easily it would lend itself to the jungle theme, Central Park is never used for a campaign quest. A surprise, but not necessary because everywhere else the jungle grows. Queens brings extensive forestry that we'll never directly interact with, but is always in view when returning to May's house. The smaller buildings and rows of gardens bring the green. We are constantly zipping across the Hudson River, either with the web wing swinging or point launching from boat to boat, so our focus stops being about buildings and starts considering water. Trees now sit in the middle of roads, separating lanes. Picturesque, but always reminding us how Kraven views the city. It's become his hunting ground. Or has it? Because we never see Kraven actively hunt in the main story, it feels like there's something missing from the open world. His physical presence. Activities, side quests, and crimes always appear at a distance, so the player has to opt into these distractions rather than being rushed by them. With Kraven being a hunter, I think it would have added weight to have him sometimes appear in New York, actively hunting one of the Spider-Men. I always come back to the Man-Bat jump scare in Arkham Knight, or hell, Taskmaster's more scripted inclusions in Spider-Man 1, where on 2 occasions he would ambush Peter and force him to fight before disappearing. This wouldn't need to be a battle to the death, because there's plenty of precedent in the comics and in this game that Kraven wants to fight Spider-Man at his best. The excuse that he's testing Pete or Miles in a quick duel before escaping into the shadows would be more than enough to suspend my disbelief. Oh, easy for you to say, Monty. Your advice for improving this luscious, detailed version of New York is just to do more work, and yes, it is easy for me to say, and it is my advice. There is plenty that could have been cut to make room for this in the scope. It should have been a priority long before the science minigames, the B-drones, MJ's final mission, the EMF site. Hindsight is 2020, I know, but the absence of both Kraven and eventually Venom in the open world makes their threat feel separate from the city. Without it, there's an, albeit thin, wall between the best New York yet and enjoying the best New York yet. Another example is how when somersaulting over rooftops and between trees, the other Spider-Man is completely absent. If you play as Pete, you won't see Miles, and if you play as Miles, you won't see Pete. Unless you're doing a couple of campaign missions or stopping an active crime. Some of the crimes will spawn a friend to help out. The other Spider-Man is our most common denominator, but Wraith and for a brief time Harry will show up as well. Kicking serious ass, incorporating the dual takedown animations that are so fun that it's wonderful they're not relegated to the context of main missions or the flame. Crimes are no longer a checklist in the menu or the friendly neighborhood app. They don't contribute to 100% completion now, so they feel more dynamic, even if they aren't. Crime reports come in from custom usernames like Axelrod Gamer, so it feels like the Spider-Men are working with New York to clean up their city. Victims we rescue chat to us, not just quick thank yous, but full monologues about how much they love us or suggesting dumb ideas like a Spidey sneaker line. I'm sure Adidas are listening closely, Miles. Some of the victims end up needing emergency care, so there's emergent play in that hipster McGee over here needs a quick swing over to an ambulance or hospital. It adds to the feeling that Spider-Man helps people, he doesn't just beat them up. Muggings transitioning into getaway cars are now weirdly gone. The shopping spree crimes that lock Spidey in a jewelry store or a bakery with a unique camera angle have also been scrapped. Something that feels a little bizarre considering how much more detailed New York's interiors are now. What's left are 4 types of crime: hunter attacks, cultist fights, open street brawls, and car chases. They all return to combat. Not a single active crime in the game brings back stuff like out-of-control choppers or car accidents that make us lift vehicles off injured folk. In fact, there is plenty from the first game missing here. Car chases have had the QuickTime events stripped out of them completely. Now you follow a car, zip to it, and Peter or Miles will immediately stop it without further input. Hunter chases have different animations from standard goons, but outside of that there is no difference and no heightening of the threat factor. In my experience, these never transitioned into a larger crime with reinforcements. They're a quick yank on the way to the next important mission. That isn't the case everywhere. The Flame will set up branding rituals in alleyways, and it was around this point of the game that Miles got ambushed by hunters when clearing them out. In fact, the Flame is exclusively where the more interesting crimes are. They're arsonists, so fighting them will entail oil tankers or burning buildings that we need to put out. Later, the symbiotes will arrive on the scene, but all crimes involving them resort to all-out brawls. Aside from something like a bus, the demands expected of the player never go beyond punching thing in street. Hunters have 2 crimes specific to them. Hunter spying makes you fight hunters on rooftops. Hunter patrols make you fight hunters in the street. Is this really 2 different crimes worthy of segregation? The main disappointment with the crimes is what comes in the endgame. Once Venom is defeated, standard goons vanish altogether. Now it's symbiote brawls, or symbiotes fighting hunters, or symbiotes fighting the flame. All that hard work pumped into trying to, at least aesthetically, differentiate crimes vanish while you're mopping up side quests.
You ever been in love, Spider-Man?
Yeah, I have.
It's beautiful. Nothing more beautiful.
If the crimes bring the mindless combat, the Friendly Neighborhood app brings the heart of the Spider-Man fantasy. Slinging through a sandstorm to punch Flint Marko in the face is just one half of that feeling. The other is something quiet and simple. Sitting on a park bench while someone's missing grandfather grieves for his wife, reflecting how Peter hasn't taken the time to talk about May and Miles hasn't taken the time to ask him about it. A cute flashback of Pete's first job with the Daily Bugle where he can't quip, is a nervous wreck, and learns his New Yorker edge from J. Jonah Jameson. Howard's pigeons are a gorgeous send-off to a fan-favourite character, showing that spectacle can be earnest as well. The Alessi brothers make it, showing how powerful Insomniac's world and movement can be when set to popular music, the same way the Warbly Jets tied a neat bow around Spidey 1's opening, and Lecrae heralded Miles' growth in his game. Howard's death, a man tired of living with a broken heart, is the most emotional moment in the game. Hailey's mission, where we play as her to stop a rogue graffiti artist tagging buildings, is fine. In a vacuum, I'd even call it lovely, a way to characterize Hailey's artistry, flesh out her romance with Miles, and a neat gameplay gimmick that puts New York at the center.
You're amazing. You know that?
A lot of fuss has been made about this mission. Your usual suspects have frothed with the word woke as their eyes have rolled to the back of their head and they start seeing stars, wondering why their friends and family don't speak to them anymore as they suck from the teats of Grums and Endymion. Brian Intihar talks about how it was a passion project for a couple of devs in almost every interview he's given. Insomniac dedicated a third of their GDC talk to discussing how they animated characters to speak ASL. Hailey's involvement is impressive, technically and from a novelty standpoint. I can only think of one game where you play as a deaf character, and that's Quill from the VR title Moss. Insomniac are right to be proud of the hard work that went into showing us how she sees the world and reads faces, with emojis bringing the youth. But does it strengthen the game as a Spider-Man package the same way Kraven would if he was in the open world? The same way a fully formed third act that didn't feel rushed would? The same way accreditation for suit designs would? The same way the fictional Twitter of the Daily Bugles would? And actually, wait, let's pivot to that. Where is the fictional social media? It was a personal highlight in Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man Miles Morales, and now it's just gone. Did Pete and Miles delete their accounts when Musk took over? The pulse of the city sat in our menu, meaning whenever we hopped in to finagle with currencies or check the status of the map, we could check the status of New Yorkers at the same time. While the unique NPC animations, positions, and contexts adds so much, they are not a suitable replacement for something as simple, clean, and quietly powerful as this. Especially during Pete's time in the black suit, I started to miss this because aside from Danica Hart mumbling that it seems a bit edgy, we don't get to see how New York responds to Spider-Man wearing a symbiote.
Y'all saw the same footage of Spider-Man I did, yeah? The way that new black suit moves, how vicious it is.
2 Spider-Men means 2 radio stations. Just the Facts with Triple J traces a shift in his approach. It's still boiling, it's still red-faced, and it's still an Alex Jones parallel, but with his return to the Bugle, his grifting has grown. Now he complains about how many heroes are thwipping through the city. Pete, Miles, Harry, and Wraith are all victims of his mustache, while Danica continues her sweet contrast, painting a positive picture that quickly takes a turn when Pete wears the black and white. There's a clumsiness to Danica's writing. She notes that the black suit is a tad moody for a friendly neighborhood so-and-so, but Danica, pal, Miles wears a black suit and you are his #1 fan. In this game, she is borderline omniscient, raising red flags about Pete before he even starts to shift personalities. She sees all and knows all, her gaze is inescapable. But both of our hosts are in this game less than they were in the past titles. Spidey 1 gave us 90 minutes total of Jonah, now it's 27 minutes. Danica is relegated to a measly 15. Neither comments on side activities, a brilliant touch that once linked our collectathon to the wider narrative, and Jonah's format change means he doesn't take calls from the general public anymore. His rants are hilarious because of the flowery language and ability to run at 100 all the time, but he is funniest when bouncing off everyday New Yorkers. And just like the social media, we lose that in this game. It makes it feel like he's yelling into the void, a fun direction if he was still a self-employed podcaster, but not if he's the voice and face of the Daily Bugle. It seems backwards. And he is not the only one whose characterization is backwards. The whole aspect of keeping him grounded and making sure the audience sees a kid as a superhero is really important. Peter makes mistakes. That was something I was very passionate about. From Toby, I'm taking his sort of less cool side of things, whereas Andrew was very cool and very contained. For me, it's just making sure I feel like a kid on set, and really be the kid everyone wants to be with superpowers. Here is what Brian Intihar said about Mary Jane Watson during IGN's Spoilercast. Quote, "I knew that those missions weren't the fan favourites coming off Spider-Man 1, and we had two choices. We could say, alright, we'll make it easy on us and just not do it, and everyone would go, great, no MJ missions. Or we could say, hey, we've talked about showing the world from all different angles. We're gonna make her moments better. We're gonna take on the challenge. We're gonna make people like playing as her. If she's a little OP, I don't give a shit. She's fun." It would be taking the easy way out if we didn't make her playable, to the point where I said, we're gonna do it. I don't care, we'll cut other stuff. And the internet reacted. Hell, I reacted when I heard that. Because Spider-Man 2 has a litany of glaring omissions that we've already catalogued and will continue to catalogue as we go. And now we're hearing from the creative director that some of those omissions are because he wanted to play as Mary Jane Watson. This is an example of misunderstanding the criticism. We play as MJ 3 times in the game, a major reduction from how often we controlled her in Spidey 1 and the DLC. In that first game, her path back to being in a relationship with Pete was difficult because he worried about her getting hurt and she thought she was capable of handling monsters like Tombstone without the superpowered backing. The idea was excellent and the character writing for both Pete and MJ was believable. It had me invested. It showed MJ's tenacity, determination and overconfidence while reflecting a major flaw back in Peter that he had to overcome, not relying on others. But the gameplay hampered the message. Anytime MJ told Pete that she wanted to help take down the bad guys, I was reminded of how she cowered in fear as Tombstone swallowed a bullet and survived. Or how her best mission began with her being taken as a hostage. Or how her mechanical depth extended to tossing lures around a surface level on-rails stealth section. Good intentions, good writing, bad gameplay to back it up. 5 years later, along comes Spider-Man 2's MJ, with poor intentions, awful writing, and good enough gameplay that belonged back in Spider-Man 1. We pick up with the Act 1 finale.
It's MJ.
Bad news. Connors' house is crawling with hunters and the doctor's MIA.
Good news. I think I know where to find him.
Mary Jane Watson's followed a lead and it's taken her to an abandoned zoo. Kraven and his hunters have captured Dr. Kurt Connors, and Kraven is trying to reactivate his lizard genes. He's keen to create a monster to fight. "There are no good men," he eventually tells MJ as he injects Connors. "Only good prey." MJ's stealth sections have improved, mainly because she starts the game with all the toys she unlocked at the end of Spider-Man 1, and also because the level design is far more interesting. During her time in Symkaria, she trained with Silver Sable, so she can put up a fight when facing down the hunters. Soon, she gets a web shooter gun thingy that can shoot and stun enemies long enough for us to run up and tackle them. It makes for strategic play. I've seen claims that Special Agent MJ undermines the threat of the hunters, and I completely disagree. She still goes down in 2 hits tops. Bringing the camera in close to her and forcing her to creep around a ramshackle base is tense and highlights how dangerous Kraven's militia is from an up-close perspective. Where we can accuse her of being overpowered is in her final mission, where she's a one-woman army descending into the bowels of a symbiote nest, one-shotting aliens like she's Marcus Phoenix from Gears of War. This mission should have been cut. It destroys the pacing of the final hour. It pretends to be some sort of character conclusion that forgets about the character assassination MJ's been dealing with for the rest of the game and undercuts the danger of the symbiotes. But here, in the hunter camp and later in the suburbs, it's a decent, fun time.
Come on, MJ. Your Symkarian is still good. Enough. Just answer.
Itvika, Vika, Monguznok.
This zoo lets MJ bring something that makes her uniquely suited for success. She spent months in Symkaria where Pete spent barely a week. She's learned the language. One of the hunters speaks Symkarian, so she uses it to find Connors. There are shortcuts to consider here. No longer are we following the yellow diamond, now we can map out a space and play with a level, with 2 objectives to complete in any order. There are even variables to consider. Short-circuiting a generator deactivates the Fidos. We can turn on drones and they'll knock out some hunters. Their cloaking tech lets us hide in plain sight for a short section. It lets us get to know the hunters intimately as a force. We see their toys up close. We hear them bicker and talk about Kraven's plans. The problems with Spidey's stealth AI return as MJ. At one point, I turned on a generator as a distraction, and one of the hunters completely ignored it and looked the opposite way for no reason. This might at first seem like clever, fluid AI, but I have no idea what he was staring at or why he was ignoring the suspicious noise. Playing as a capable MJ that's more at home in The Last of Us than Spider-Man would lend really nicely to her character arc in the first game. If her stealth sections were like this, I wouldn't have struggled to empathize with her desire to take on villains herself. Gameplay and writing would complement each other if this was ported over. But in Spider-Man 2, I don't really know what MJ's arc is supposed to be, or what the hell happened to her by the middle of the game. She turns into a robot, spouting lines of dialogue, tearing apart her relationship with Pete, and eventually, when the symbiote takes her over, I have to believe that everything we've learned about the alien is a lie, or else Insomniac have written a character with pure, putrid hate in her heart. What's the line from Always Sunny in Philadelphia? Will they? Won't they? I know they won't, and I don't want them to. I'm not even sure Insomniac wants them to. Since Jonah returned to the Daily Bugle, she struggled with him being her new boss. Her serious journalism is being overlooked by sensationalist headlines about Spider-Man being a menace. She's ground down by a working environment she doesn't believe in anymore and is actively feeding her drivel about her boyfriend.
Peter, the 2 of you tore through half the city. Like, did you see what you did to the museum? I'm honestly surprised nobody got killed.
I'm not. And you know I had to cure him somehow. I mean, should I have just let him keep destroying things on his own?
That's not the... I'm gonna work here for the rest of the night. My muse for a new Jonah-proof article has finally struck.
Later, when Pete begins his descent into edgy Spider-Man, his fight with the Lizard destroys half the city, something that would have happened regardless of what suit he's wearing. The Lizard is responsible for the carnage, not Pete. MJ's response to that isn't to wait, isn't to have a conversation, is to immediately pivot to writing a Jonah-proof article with the headline, "What's up with Spider-Man? Reckless property damage, violent outbursts. Is he causing more harm than good?" At this point in the game, Pete is yet to have a violent outburst. It's the cruelest thing to happen in a game where Venom bites Kraven's head off. Later, when Pete confronts her about the article, her response is meek. "I can't lose this job, Pete. I tried to tell you." "Yeah," Pete replies. "But you didn't, did you?" Not once in a Black Suit adaptation should I be taking dickhead Peter's side, but here, MJ is categorically in the wrong and it feels like she's the one who's had the personality shift. This is a deep betrayal of their relationship. She barely waited a day to write and publish the article, an action that should only be reserved for a symbiote Spider-Man who really goes dark. But we'll talk about that in the next section. After all of it, when the symbiote is gone and she takes her name off of it, there isn't so much as an apology, despite Pete apologizing profusely to everyone, all the time, forever, about how he behaved. Your name might be off the article, Watson, but the damage is done, pal. We'll talk about Scream when we get to her, but that boss compounds all of the weird, mangled writing MJ is bludgeoned with. For a sequel to a game that was lauded for its character work, MJ's arc feels like an afterthought. If more time was spent on getting her writing right, or at least consistent, and less time was spent on making us play as her no matter what was sacrificed, I'd actually enjoy the MJ sequences more. On consecutive playthroughs, playing as this ball of toxic sludge is more painful with the knowledge of what the story does to her. Oh, and speaking of toxic sludge, let's stop talking around the symbiote, shall we?
What happened?
I don't know.
Pete and Harry arrive to rescue MJ and Connors. Kraven seizes his chance and stabs Peter with a poisoned blade. Mary Jane, not yet sacrificed to the altar of crap writing, grabs Pete and tries to lock him out of there as Harry and Kraven crack at each other like thunder. To save his life, the symbiote latches on to Pete. Harry's undying love for his best friend imbues the symbiote with those qualities, the same way his admiration of Spider-Man imbued it with its own spider logo earlier. It saves Peter's life and refuses to return to Harry. After all the teasing, we enter Act 2 with Black Suit Spider-Man. He's not a geek, he's just so burdened by saving the world that people don't understand him. I don't focus on Peter's guilt, but he occasionally thinks, I can't take it anymore. My whole life is falling apart because of Spider-Man. Spidey wrestles with himself over his demons and responsibility. That's what's so noble about him. I like that he acknowledges his problems and admits his fears, but still overcomes them. Oh, and my favourite villain is Kraven the Hunter. Have you read the Black Suit arc? I mean really read it, not just looked at the cliff notes. I have. It's good. It's also a bloody mess, split between annuals, one-shots, crossovers, and 3 Spider-Man comics, Amazing, Spectacular, and Web, a story that originally began as an excuse to give Pete a new look and explain why his suit keeps ripping, grew arms, legs, and goop through numerous different writers and adaptations. Pete pisses off Aunt May, breaks up with Black Cat, deals with a tedious gang war, and we get the legendary moment where Mary Jane Watson reveals she's known for years that he's Spider-Man. None of this has anything to do with the black suit. Pete's personality doesn't change when wearing it. He's still the worrisome, good-natured hero that everyone knows. Mr. Fantastic quickly learns that the black suit is an alien and Pete starts ripping it off in the next panel. The symbiote is still dangerous, it's still a parasite, but the worst thing it does in that story is take Pete's body out for nighttime heroing so he's exhausted and struggles to function during the day. It eventually escapes the Fantastic Four and slithers back to Peter, but as soon as he realizes, he uses church bells to rip it off one more time in this iconic scene by Louise Simonson and Greg LaRocque. People like to point to the fact he does kill someone during this era, but it's an accident. He thinks he's punching Wolverine, and he's wearing the old red and blue when he does. It has nothing to do with the symbiote or its effects. I've also seen the death of Jean DeWolf raised as a great black suit story, and it is. In fact, it's one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told and gives us a Peter more brutal and cold. In the opening issue, a mugger surrenders and drops to his knees, and Pete relishes in knocking him out anyway. But he's not wearing the symbiote here. He's wearing a regular black suit that Black Cat made him. Same goes for Kraven's last hunt. Told you it was a mess. So, where does this version of the symbiote come from? 1994's Spider-Man the Animated Series updated a lot of old comic storylines, some for the better and some for the worse. One of the tales that got a major upgrade and streamlining was the Venom arc. This is where the symbiote first started to change Pete's personality. It's wonderful. In the span of 2 episodes, Black Suit Spider-Man snaps at Aunt May, scares Felicia Hardy, has a go at Flash Thompson, tortures Rhino, nearly kills Rhino, threatens J. Jonah Jameson, nearly kills some bounty hunters, completely stops quipping despite Shocker giving him every opportunity, threatens Kirk Connors, turns down a stealth opportunity to crash through a door instead, breaks Shocker's arms, and then tries to kill him. That's all in barely 40 minutes during a cartoon for kids. The trilogy of episodes is brilliant, to be honest. Eventually, when Venom attacks, he unmasks Spidey a few feet from Jonah, so the tension of their fight isn't just life or death, it's will Peter retain his secret. So, with a whole video game and 3 hours of main story in the black suit, what does Insomniac do with it?
I see a man. I sense a beast.
The game's black suit squelches at a glance. Pete's muscles are emphasized not just through the added bulkiness, but through sinew and threaded texture on his biceps, calves, and thighs. It looks alive, even when it's still, a constant reminder that beneath the suit is Spider-Man's red and blue. Pete might lose himself, but the heart of a hero still beats in there somewhere. Like the marketing says, he and the symbiote are greater together. Already enjoying the newfound strength the suit gives him, and acutely aware that they need to find Dr. Connors if Harry's going to get it back, Pete decides to start his own hunt. He blows off Miles again, and goes undercover to a mansion party where Kraven's militia are celebrating the capture of the Lizard. Kraven awaits in a nearby chapel, a battleground the hunter picked not for strategy but because it's cool and Kraven's extra as hell. "I just want to save my friend," Pete snarls through gritted teeth, pained by the toll of the church bells. He got overconfident. Kraven knows his weakness and has his next target. The black suit adapts to Pete's thoughts. It turns into a tuxedo so he can sneak into the party, highlighting how in control he feels with it on, when in reality he's anything but. It's not long before we start to catch differences. A sentience. Its webbing is black, something that looks very cool and very ominous after a combat arena. It deflects attacks without Pete acknowledging them, replicated in gameplay when he goes into rage mode. Here in the mansion, a hunter tries to get a cheap shot on him and the suit reacts viciously. There's a gradual downhill slide to Yuri Lowenthal's performance, something he and the team worked hard on so it didn't just feel like Pete snaps on and off from being dickhead Spider-Man and early stages Spider-Man. A gravel to his voice, an unbridled rage, a snippiness. But when the credits roll, it's hard not to feel like Black Suit Spidey's a bit toothless, always at risk of doing something terrible, but never actually doing something terrible. In 3 hours, he snaps at Miles and Ganke during the lizard chase, intimidates Kirk Connors but doesn't actively threaten him, thinks that it's a good thing Kraven killed his family, is mean to the lizard when fighting him, confronts MJ about her vicious article, implies Harry is a junkie, considers killing Kraven, a man who wants to die so the impact is dampened, fights Miles and loses. That's it. He doesn't brutalize anyone, he doesn't get carried away, he doesn't break bones, he doesn't openly threaten friends or allies. He broods more, he grumbles more. Yuri Lowenthal rages in the sound booth to make us feel the rawness, but the story doesn't capitalize on it. Because Pete is so capital N nice, small moments like when he tosses a civilian to the ground rather than placing them feels momentous, but I think it says something that this is one of the more shocking things Pete does in the suit. Brian Intihar pointed out that, of course, they wouldn't make Peter kill someone because there's no coming back from that, but there are rungs on that ladder that the game could have climbed and it refuses to. For a game all about redemption, I was expecting Spider-Man to brutalize one of the redeemed villains. There's a sequence later where Miles goes missing and Pete starts looking for him and he tracks him down in the span of 10 minutes. What if his search took him to Prowler? It's pretty suspect that the hunters haven't gone after Aaron Davis, and from Pete's perspective there's precedent for Prowlers selling Miles out to the baddies. Even though Aaron is completely innocent, what if Pete tracked him down and broke his body while interrogating him, lost to the symbiote? The game loses a lot of its power because it seems afraid of taking Pete to a dark place. His turn feels sanitized, and it's made inconsistent by the open world.
You and Pidgey getting on board?
Think I'll skip this one. Wait for the next.
When it comes to New York, this is a tale of 3 Spider-Men. Pete and Miles have different dialogue and different reactions to the world, or things like the friendly neighborhood missions. A humongous task that sometimes gives us freedom to dictate which hero engages with which part of the world. But when Pete takes on the black suit, ambition swamps execution. The saying goes that there's nothing scarier than a Spider-Man who doesn't quip. This third Spider brings uniquely aggressive comments and bristles with rage. New York streets darken when he arrives to the scene of a crime because he catches getaway cars while screaming, "Nobody gets away!" or relishes the pain he dishes out to the hunters. But there is jarring inconsistency here. Spider-bots, drones, Sandman challenges, Emily May, and friendly neighborhood quests barely change or don't change at all. I had monstrous symbiote Spidey go from raining down tentacular hell on hunters and then warmly sitting with Howard and leading his pigeons on a merry chase. Collecting a Spider-bot now removes the shallow comments and is replaced with stony silence. Emily May quests still involve bee puns, can't forget the bees. The end of the Sandman quest still involves Peter wishing Flint Marko well and bringing the statue to his daughter in earnest. Taking photographs of New Yorkers have changed. Rather than saying nice after a snap, he now says good enough. There is an incredible friendly neighborhood quest where Pete works with Ganke to deprogram a hunter dog and turn it into a guide dog for a blind woman. I did this right after battling the lizard, the final tagline before he evolves fully into dickhead Spider-Man, and his responses were all as friendly neighborhood as you could get. If you do the flame missions now, his interactions with Yuri or the cultists don't change. Both Black Suit Spidey and Normal Suit Spidey try to do the cute fist bump with Yuri. He still feels awkward and goofy in her presence. friends, trying to rekindle their old friendship. He grows concerned about how brutal she is as a vigilante, despite moments earlier careening down on some muggers while screaming, "A break-in? How about I break you?" As I was reconciling with all of this, with the amount of work it must have taken to get the minimal open world changes we do get, I was reminded of a moment way earlier at the Emily May Foundation. As Peter, we get different dialogue if we don't check out the koi fish pond before meeting up with Harry. Why was this prioritized and not the side quests? The answer, inevitably, is scope. But if that's the case, I think side quests should have been locked off from Peter during his dark turn. Symbiote Spider-Man is all about the violence, misunderstanding that the key to being a hero is saving people, not kicking ass, so locking off side tasks like the friendly neighborhood quests would have reinforced that. But because this is an open world Spidey game, Insomniac didn't want to take things away from us. I wish they had been braver, fed us what they think is best for us rather than leaving it up to the player. Aside from JJJ and Danica haphazardly commenting on the suit, New York doesn't respond to having a hardcore Spider-Man. Pete will still give civilians high fives or catch them when they faint. They still point finger guns at us and wink, "Looking good, Spidey." Team-up crimes change a little bit, where we can't high five or hug Miles when it's over, but that is as far as it goes. However, what the game gets so right is in how it shows the danger of the symbiote without words.
So the suit's got some sensitive ears.
Apparently. What happened?
More static discharges. The accelerator's still running though. The serum's okay.
Pete starts to think that the suit will let him have it all. He can work with Harry, keep being Spider-Man, and hell, he might even go on vacation. Together, he and Harry start to work on a lizard cure for Kurt Connors. Whatever Kraven injected him with will have sped up his mutation. We need to save him. They get the cure, but it costs them Emily May. While the blame lies at the Hunter's feet, we destroy a lot of the Foundation ourselves. Combat in this environment encourages throwing furniture, breaking floorboards, and because so much of the space is destructible, Pete doesn't need to do much to cause collateral damage. The strength of the suit sets fire to the lab, but Pete's recklessness lights the match. Harry doesn't blame us for the destruction, but he grieves the loss of the Foundation all the same. His dream is destroyed and his suit is gone. He's already started to get sick again. Later, he'll call Miles for their only one-to-one conversation in the game and say he's starting to feel useless. He came so close to having it all. So, here's a question for you. Why does the suit make Peter a dick and not Harry? He wears the symbiote at Coney Island and he's literally never nicer the whole game. Harry has the suit for at least a week and has spent years in a tank bonding with it. Pete has the suit for 3 days? Wow, we just blast through this arc, don't we? And it isn't long before he turns to the dark side. Well, I think it all goes back to his hero complex. Peter has one consistent personality flaw in the first third of the game. He keeps Miles at arm's length the second Harry comes back on the scene. He starts to rely on the other Spider-Man less. 4 times Miles checks in and 4 times he disregards him in favour of heroing alone. It's not specific to the black suit, it was there before, a carryover from his first game, and the black suit worsens it. The longer he wears it, the longer his priorities change. They come from saving Harry to being a better Spider-Man. Harry doesn't have a hero complex. He has a thirst for adventure and an unrivaled love for Pete. His purity is dull, but it means the symbiote isn't tainted by him. Pete carries guilt, a need to save everyone, and a new desire to never let what happened to Aunt May happen to anyone else he loves. A better Spider-Man is the only way to make sure of that, right? He starts to resent Miles and Genki's input, telling MJ that he should just handle things himself. When he's alone, he wonders what's so great about the other Spider-Man anyway. J. Jonah Jameson in one ear telling him he's not good enough, Danica Hart in the other bigging up Miles while raising concerns about Pete. He's the hero here, not them. Nobody understands. May once told him that to help someone is to help everyone, but what if Spider-Man could help everyone? We trace the symbiote's growth as it's passed from host to host. At first, it's shaped by Harry's love for Peter. When it passes to Pete, it's shaped further by his desire to be the best Spider-Man, the ultimate hero. Deep down, Pete always believed that he was the only one who could save the city, but that belief is molded further because the symbiote brought Harry's belief and love for him with it. The symbiote took Harry's confidence in Pete and gave Pete overconfidence.
Regeneration is so cool. And so gross.
The EMF isn't the only place where gameplay does the storytelling for us. There's something stark and uneasy about symbiote Spider-Man creeping into a child's bedroom as he hunts for Kurt Connors. And the lizard chase was a big reveal for a reason. It covers Pete's snideness, the spectacle, and eventually, when we play it for ourselves, the brutality. Grotesque imagery encapsulates this sequence. Pete's tentacles grow and shriek and maw as we battle the lizard. It's the best boss fight in the entire series. High praise. Underhanded comment. No wonder your family left you, Pete barks at Connors. You're weak. It's cruel. The quips are gone in favor of direct, pointed insults. A race along the Hudson River with both Spider-Men leads to 2 phases plus a chase plus a final 3rd phase with a fully mutated lizard. The lizard was the 6th rogue that clashed with Spider-Man, arriving in Amazing Spider-Man number 6. Before Lizard made the sewers his home, he actually lived in Florida, lurking in a swamp. Pete gets a plane to go and find out what's going on and eventually learns all about Kurt Connors and his missing arm and his plan to remake the world in the image of snakes and crocodiles. He was just a scaly guy in the original art, but Spider-Man 2 is pulling from the more vicious depiction in the Shed storyline that has Kurt growing more and more monstrous until he's all lizard, barely man. He's terrifying, built up through a creepy crawly Miles sequence so that when Pete eventually battles him, we are confronted by how different this all feels with the symbiote in the room. 2 monsters locked in a cage together. The parry isn't necessary for Connors, but it completely changes the fight because of his big, sweeping, easily telegraphed attacks. Boss design informs characterization by encouraging Pete to brawl with the lizard. His power, his grit, his thirst for violence are fully on show. Man, when this game rocks, it rocks. Injecting him with the antidote, Connor awakens in the secret Oscorp lab where he once studied the alien. It crash-landed with a meteor years ago. It tried to bond with Kurt first, and the guards had to shoot his arm off to stop it. In Insomniac's world, he's not a battlefield medic who lost a limb to war. The symbiote's presence threw everything off balance. Even before Pete, even before Venom, it started a snowball of chaos.
We need to call Oscorp. We need to destroy it.
Destroy us?
With Pete's embracement of the symbiote, wearing it despite knowing the dangers, the suit changes. The spider logo loses its cleanliness, the legs are jagged and rough, the eyes grow wider, better suited for hunting prey. Everyone benefits when Spider-Man's at his best.
Eyes on the target. Pursuing.
It's nuts to me. Growing up, being a huge comic book fan, I loved Spider-Man. I remember that I used to go into my brother's room when he'd go to school and I'd sneak his comic books out and read them and try to put them back exactly how they were so he wouldn't know that I'd touched them. When you see it, it blew my mind. When you're in the booth and you don't get to see it, you're like, okay, I'm Spider-Man, I get it, I'm playing a superhero. But when you see it, you're like, holy crap, I'm Spider-Man. It's so cool.
Wait, you're still in the suit. I thought Connors was gonna help you get it off. What about Harry?
Sorry, can we do this tomorrow? Just so beat from Lizard Wrangler.
Night falls. Let's let Pete sleep a while and talk about the upgrade system. Oh boy. Miles and Peter share skill points. If you're barreling along mopping up crimes as Peter, both Spider-Men receive XP to pour into the 3 skill trees available. Pete gets his own, Miles gets another, and then there's a shared one between the 2. You're averaging a lot more experience points this time around, likely because the skill tree is so overcrowded with skills we should already have. There's a lot of emphasis on passive abilities, making rage mode last longer, or building on top of your active abilities, like making Spider Whiplash electrify enemies. But some of this stuff goes hard and completely changes how you approach fighting. Take Miles' Venom Clouds that spawn sparky little balls that can either heal him or detonate and stun bad guys depending on which abilities we use. But there are a chunk of abilities, especially in the shared skill tree, that undermine the growth of both Spider-Men in their corresponding games, wastes the player's time, and ekes out abilities. Going into Spider-Man 2, here's some of the things Spider-Man could do when swinging about the city. Air jump. Air dash. Air tricks recharging both air jump and air dash. While playing Spider-Man 2, here's some of the things we need to unlock in our skill tree. Air jump. Air dash. Air tricks recharging both air jump and air dash. A couple of these are especially egregious. aerial escapades that recharge his air abilities through tricks is frankly ridiculous. It costs 2 skill points, is at the end of the traversal skill tree, and unlocks something Miles Morales gave us for free. It's not just traversal either. Going into Spider-Man 2, here's some of the things Peter or Miles could do in combat. Web throw, web throwing brute enemies, recharging focus by hitting stunned enemies. All of Miles' Venom abilities, throwing enemies to the ground from the air, perfect dodge recharge. And while playing Spider-Man 2, here's some of the things you unlock in the skill tree. Web throw, web throwing brute enemies, recharging focus by hitting stunned enemies. All of Miles' Venom abilities, throwing enemies to the ground from the air, perfect dodge recharge. If Insomniac are going to copy paste a skill tree, I'm going to copy paste a voiceover. It's padding, it's narratively inconsistent, it's there to try and make it seem like there's more added to the game than there actually is. It's hard to look at Miles specifically as a Spider-Man who gradually grew into his own confident hero if he's entering a battle against Sandman without all the stuff he could do a year ago. Did he just forget? Even with all that padding, the skill tree can't quite keep up with the game. By the time I entered the endgame, I had 5 skill points just sitting waiting to be spent despite maxing out Pete and Miles. What are these for? That New Game Plus mode that was barely a dream at launch and took 5 months to come out? Speaking of dreams, I wonder what Pete's dreaming about right now.
MJ.
Oh boy. Capitalizing on Pete's exhaustion, the symbiote takes his unconscious body out for a test drive. The hunters attack May's house, and MJ is aghast as she sees her boyfriend's body thrashing wildly through suburban New York, tossing goons around with ease. Why does it do this? In the comics, it does the same thing, though there, it retains Spider-Man's form and is a lot less tenderly. Because Insomniac's symbiote is slowly becoming defined by who Peter is, it's absorbed his hero complex. Peter's guilt tops everything, to the point he feels guilty for taking a break, resting, sleeping. So when he's passed out, the symbiote rushes out into the world to keep being a hero. The hunters are just in the way. Playing as MJ keeps the tension, multiplying the horror because she can't fight back. The hunters are threat enough, but what's that shadow lurking in the construction site? Whatever's happening to Pete, it's a job for Spider-Man, but Miles is taken hostage by the hunters and the symbiote escapes into the night. Let's give him his space and dive back into the menu. The token system returns. It's not as dense as Spider-Man 1, but thankfully not as shallow as Spider-Man Miles Morales. 4 types are used to buy suits, upgrade our gadgets, or unlock new suit tech. The issue is with how this is eked out to us. City tokens come from stuff like taking photographs for Robbie, activities we can access from early on. But hero tokens don't become a focus until the game's second act. Mysterio's Mysterium, hunter bases, friendly neighborhood apps, symbiote nests, and substantial side quests like The Flame reward us with them, and unless you're hammering the Mysteriums right after Coney Island, you're going to be running a little dry. You get more hero tokens for completing the activities in a full district, but that won't start happening until much later on when everything is unlocked. I was drowning in city tokens and tech, but always felt a few hero tokens short of where I should be, despite methodically working through the side content. Tech parts are carried over from Miles Morales, except now there isn't a limited set amount. They'll respawn randomly all over the city. They'll just sit in alleyways or rooftops, blinking and beckoning with inconsistent amounts. 1, 16, 19, and so on. Crimes carry that inconsistency as well. 50 tech parts, and 60 tech parts. Why does a car chase, something that demands 1 button press, reward the same amount of tech parts as a full-blown street assault? It means you never really know what to expect when out on the tech part hunt. That's not surprising, it just means I can't set my expectations for how I'll be rewarded. Back when the series threw tokens at you willy-nilly, specifically tying each one to a particular activity like finding backpacks or research, any inconsistency didn't really matter. But now tokens have become more valuable and more precious, simply because there's less in total, less variety, and they need to be spread thinner. Often I was forced to choose between a cool new suit and a useful new gadget, when in reality I think I'd be more engaged with the upgrade system if I knew specific tokens unlocked gadgets and specific tokens unlocked suits. I'd know where to go if I want to get a fresh look, and where to go if I wanted to boost my skills. Suit mods and suit powers, unique abilities that let us do things like shock an enemy if they attack us, or slow down time for a few seconds after a perfect dodge, or whip out a guitar for an area of effect attack, are gone altogether. Nothing replaces them. They're gone. They've vanished, like so much other cool stuff in the other games. Suit tech arrives in the menu instead, letting us spend our tokens to boost health, damage, focus, swing speed, depending on which part of the Spider-Man you think needs a helping hand. There is choice here, because occasionally you need to pick between tech like healing after a parry or healing after a dodge, but it does not significantly replace the suit mods because there's nothing that feels special or zany in here. At least the comic book pop-ups and Spider-Verse frame rate are still in the game, now accessible from the menu rather than forcing you to pick a mod slot. It sounds like Harry's heard that the mod system's gone because when Pete goes to visit him, he is pissed. Peter doesn't remember the rampage last night. In fact, he's never felt better.
I can't lose this job,
Your job is to write the truth.
I did.
The truth is, I'm the hero here, not you.
As the darkness curdles at Pete's heart, we see Norman's vulnerability in the next room. He's lost sleep, desperately looking for a cure for his son. There's no conniving or manipulating. He's just a terrified father. Harry watches from the hallway as Norman leans on Pete for a moment of support, and a bitterness starts to grow. Pete's alienating everyone. MJ has taken a step back, Harry is overcome with fury, Miles is missing, Rio blames us. It shows just how quickly Pete's fallen that Norman Osborn is who he's empathizing with most.
Are you okay?
Go. Please.
You need to understand that it's a matter of having good luck that I was cast in this role. The fact people were able to connect with the character and the voice is very gratifying, but at the time we did it, it was just another acting job. I had a day job. I didn't need the cartoons to live or for any artistic pleasure beyond being acting work. Nobody knew at the time that this series was going to last more than a couple of years. It's wonderful people like my Spider-Man, but not expected. So where is Miles? On the outskirts of the city in an old abandoned fortress, Kraven throws Miles into a gauntlet of poison gas, laser gates, and garrisons of enemies. At first it seems like an escape, but soon the purpose is clear. Kraven wants the little spider to earn the right to battle Mr. Negative.
There's no escape.
I've tried.
Kraven promised his men a show. Let's give him one. While also looking at what the game says about reform, second chances, how forgiveness isn't owed, and all the juicy stuff that makes up the brilliant parts of Miles' story. How do you reform a supervillain? A tragic backstory isn't enough, but lays good groundwork to build from. Empathy is a road well trodden to second chances, and because of how he was characterized in Spider-Man 1, Martin Lee is set up to succeed when we see him in the sequel. He was never a mustache-twirling villain. He was rigorous and determined in his quest for vengeance, and as Miles eventually points out, he's a man who simply thought his problems were more important than the lives of others. Time in prison hasn't been kind to him. He's exhausted, downtrodden. The clean philanthropist of the past showed a man who knew about the darkness inside but didn't want the world to see it. He was tortured by Norman Osborn as a child to the point that he accidentally killed his parents. You don't need to dig deep to empathize with him. Part of reform is confronting and learning to forgive yourself for the things you've done. By the time we fight him in the arena, Lee hasn't. He's locked in that awkward crevice between wallowing in his sins and excusing them. "Don't recount my sins to me," he barks at Miles. "It wasn't personal. What do you want, an apology?" He wants to distract his mind from the damage he's done. He uses his revenge as a barrier so he doesn't have to confront the fact he murdered so many innocent people. He doesn't think he owes Miles an apology because he doesn't think of Spider-Man as being a man. Superheroes and supervillains. The world's a stage and they're just players. The regret Lee has is key to his reform, even if he's not yet willing to chew on it. This is contrasted by Flint Marko, Sandman. He willingly does his time in prison after the game's tutorial and sadly apologizes when the sand settles. Pete acknowledges that in Sandman's case, he never got to know the man behind the sand, and when their call ends, it's clear Flint's just a victim of circumstance, wrapped up in regret for the things he does. It won't take much for him to earn his second chance because he's so empathetic.
Thank you. You helped me get my mind right.
I'm sorry for not listening.
What makes Mr. Negative's power so interesting is that it lets him empathize with others. Battling him in the gladiator arena is tense because of how Miles bristles with rage while being on the back foot. This is exactly what he's dreamed of, a chance to confront Lee for the death of his father, but the circumstances colour it. He's got what he wanted, and it sucks. Even if the boss fight is great fun. The final phase is what's memorable. Lee uses his powers to dive into Miles' psyche. What starts as a means of stunning him turns into something more introspective, a full sequence where Negative uncovers why Miles has such hate for him. He sees Rio, he sees Genki, he sees Peter, and he sees Jefferson Davis. He sees what he took from Miles, and he sees the impact it's had on him, the great expectations he's put on himself every day since the attack on City Hall.
Do it. Please.
Finally forced to confront what he did head on, the regret that's been gnawing at Lee for 2 years explodes. He asks Miles to kill him, to end the pain. But Miles swallows his anger and throws Lee from the building, saving him. He'll later return the favour, not to Miles, but to Peter. If confronting Miles in Kraven's arena creates his path for atonement, the final act of the game is when he steps on it. Martin Lee isn't redeemed in Spider-Man 2, but he starts to atone. He steps onto that path by grabbing the second and third ways you can reform a villain: a hero moment and self-sacrifice.
Tell your friend thanks for looking out for me. See you around, Spider.
Tombstone gets a small pedestrian hero moment on Coney Island. A go-kart nearly kills someone and he uses his strength to leap in and save them. It's tiny and nobody ever really seems to be in danger, but showing the simplicity of Tombstone's new life, framed by a hero moment that's treated as a cute joke, shows that he's achieved what Sandman or Martin Lee haven't yet. Civilian life, away from the underworld, helping people rather than hurting them. There's no self-sacrifice here though, that's reserved for Martin. This is the most common beat for atonement because it's, honestly, the easiest to write. It eliminates a villain as a threat and gives them a moral action to end the story on. Darth Vader turning on the Emperor and getting himself killed. Otto Octavius sinking his reactor and drowning with it. Finn grabbing Miles and absorbing the new form blast. What Lee does is less straightforward. Jumping ahead 2 hours, he expends all of his power to neutralize the symbiote still attached to Pete. He thinks it might kill him and does it anyway to save the life of the man who put him behind bars. But in the end, his life isn't what's sacrificed, it's his powers, leaving behind a man who still has to atone for what he did. This isn't an easy way out for him and he understands that, doing the right thing and handing himself back to the police.
I won't forgive you. It's just not in me. But I can't carry this hate for you anymore, man. So let's set things right. You and me.
Just because Lee regrets what he did doesn't mean the story, and by extension Miles, owes him forgiveness. Miles says he doesn't have it in him, an incredibly human response that's more powerful than forgiveness ever could be. If he did forgive Martin, that could be the end of his story. He might not go on in search of atonement. But even if that was the case, Miles can't forgive Lee on behalf of everyone who died or had loved ones taken from them by his vendetta. Lee might have sacrificed himself, he might have done the right thing in the end, but that doesn't mean redemption is owed to him. And what matters is Martin knows that, and he's willing to do the work to seek it anyway. That's the most crucial step in earning a second chance. And while Martin Lee will start doing this off screen, we see it evidenced in Aaron, Quentin, and Kurt. Aaron started to do the work back in Miles Morales, giving up the Prowler gauntlets after Jeff's death and being drawn back into a life of crime when Roxxon made an offer he couldn't refuse. He eventually turned to the light side when Harlem was attacked, but he knows and Miles knows that a hero moment wasn't enough to earn back his family's trust.
Are you really putting Prowler behind you?
Behind us.
Kurt Connors is a different beast. He seeks redemption in the employment of Oscorp, treating Harry and working for Norman. His bones creak with regret, his punishment served up by his wife, having taken his son and leaving him. Earlier in the story, when Pete hunts for Kurt, we see a suburban home fractured by divorce. The secret lab in the basement where Connors once turned himself into the lizard is bolted by a sonic lock. The passcode is his son's favourite nursery rhyme. if Kurt ever got the urge to experiment on himself again, if he ever succumbed to the pain of losing his arm, the nursery rhyme would act as a reminder of everything he lost the first time around. It's a coping mechanism and a barrier.
Mysterio will always be a villain, just as Spider-Man will always be a hero. It's when you start looking at the people behind the masks that things get messy.
When the Mysterium started, Quentin Beck didn't want to cash in on his villainous past. He hated the name Mysterium, but soon, his producers Betsy and Cole changed his mind. He could completely change his image this way. When it comes to doing the work, Quentin takes that literally. Pushed on by his producers, he spends day and night tinkering with his Mysteriums. While he has his reservations and feels beaten down by his collaborators, he throws himself into his illusion machines to keep his focus. There's an awkward beat where we learn that the Mysteriums scan people's credit cards to build a profile of them and conjure the illusion, but Quentin legitimately thinks that this is harmless. It's Betsy and Cole who are using the tech to steal from people. He shows a deep understanding of what fueled Mysterio as a concept. Ego. We pick up that he regularly goes to therapy to work on regulating his emotions and keep the Mysterio part of himself in check. What makes Quentin stand out is that he understands that in the end, he can't erase his past. Mysterio will always be a villain. A rebrand won't change that. He has to keep doing the work. He has to keep earning that second chance. Somebody who hasn't earned a second chance is Kraven. Following a tip-off from Martin Lee, Pete blazes through his fortress, rage mode activated without any input from the player. It's time to finish the hunt.
I'm assured that material is unbreakable. But I believe anything can be broken.
Just like almost every other boss in the game, Kraven is a great fight. It's a straight up brawl where the hunter uses all of his cunning against us. Dogs, mines, disappearing into the trees. Peter brought a gun to a knife fight, but Kraven is the knife. The black suit isn't a boon here, it gets in the way. Kraven rings the bell to disarm the symbiote and it stuns us, dividing our attention and slowing us down. Despite the hissing of the symbiote, Pete still holds back, until finally the taste of battle gets to him. In the gardens of Kraven's fortress, his evolution is complete. A turn to the dark side highlighted by this imagery where Spidey's lifted by his tentacle arms in a shot framed similarly to Doc Ock from the first game. Otto lost himself. Now it's Pete's turn. Kill. Kill.
Stop! No.
While Kraven is a fun fight, he's not the highlight of Act 2's ending. This is. I don't think anyone was surprised that Miles would fight Black Suit Spider-Man, but it doesn't mean the impact has lessened. If you cut Venom altogether and fleshed out Kraven's hunt more, this would make a stellar ending to the game. Pete versus Miles. Symbiote Spider-Man attacks us with everything we've enjoyed up until now. Tentacle-based abilities that cover great distances and are quick-fast. Web-zipping straight to Miles so dodging is suddenly a little trickier. Pete's unpredictable. Sometimes objects we can throw at him will be thrown back. Miles needs to resort to Kraven's tactics by clanging the bell. The student becomes the teacher. I need this suit, Pete roars. It makes me a better Spider-Man. I'm the hero. I don't get saved. All I've wanted was to save everyone. MJ, May. The game's thesis statement laid out through boss dialogue. What makes the symbiote so dangerous isn't that it makes Spider-Man a villain, it's that it makes Pete think he's the hero when Black Suit heroism is toxic. Through the suit, his hero complex transforms into something bitter and desperate. I'm finally everything everyone needs me to be, he screams. While the clashing of fists brings the pulp, Miles doesn't beat Peter through violence. He beats him through talking. He manages to break past the hold of the symbiote and get through to his friend long enough for Pete to rip the suit off. Miles is the catalyst, but Pete saves himself. It had to start with him. Spider-Man's second chance. Shame then for the game and the Spider-Men that the symbiote has other ideas. Being a Spider-Man is just about overcoming your emotions, your pain and the struggles that life brings you, becoming your own superhero. Everyone goes through a typical struggle, but once you've overcome that struggle and that pain, you become a Spider-Man. Wearing the mask is like bringing out that inner god in you, just being a loving person and being the do what's right type of guy. Anyone can wear the mask, and I know that sounds like a cliche, but once you realize who you are and what you have to fight through and what the world brings, you become Spider-Man. I knew 3 things before we started the game, Brian Intihar told the Academy of Interactive Arts. I knew we'd open with Sandman, I knew we were doing the Web Wings, and I knew we'd do Venom, and Venom was going to be playable. Act 3 opens with a bang. Pete takes the symbiote to Kirk Connors at Oscorp, hoping the good doctor can destroy it. Harry intercepts. The man abandoned and betrayed by Peter is sensed by the being abandoned and betrayed by Spider-Man. Without the symbiote, he'll die, and he's at the end of his rope.
Harry, are you... Oh, God.
No! Don't hurt him!
Playing as Venom is one of the game's true surprises, because the series has reminded, reinforced, and reiterated how much Oscorp sucks as an organization. Rampaging through security, breaking bones and killing guards offers a guilt-free power fantasy. Even if they're just guys with families, we're encouraged not to care because the destruction is so much fun. Norman Osborn's humanity, his heartbreak at seeing his son like this, crumbles away with the walls of his facility. "I can't lose you too," he says, but we and Harry don't listen. The rampage is all that matters. The environment shatters under Venom's strength. Character work, family drama, the fact Pete entered the lab with his mask off, meaning every camera would pick up his secret identity immediately. Don't worry about it, the guards are dead and the cameras are trashed. Identity saved, I guess. What makes Venom so special? Why can't Marvel let him go, and why do fans keep gravitating to him? Why does Sony producer Avi Arad adore him so much that he forced Sam Raimi to bring him into the 3rd Tobey Maguire film? The answer to that last one is that Arad thinks Venom's a moneymaker, but it's in Venom's voice actor, the late, great Tony Todd, that we get a more rounded answer. He told IGN, "My roles in horror laid the groundwork. Once I looked at the source material and figured out what his strengths were and what his weaknesses were, if there are any, I just made an algebraic equation. Horror laying the groundwork. When it comes to playable Venom, Ultimate Spider-Man was the game to beat. Activision's thoroughly underrated 2005 release that is now unavailable to play everywhere. Video games are amazing until they suck. There, we took control of Venom as he stole through the cel-shaded streets of New York, throwing cars, biting heads, absorbing unwitting civilians into the symbiote. It was one of the prime selling points of that game. You could scale buildings with huge tendrils and humongous leaps, and my memory is seared with the thrill of playing as the lethal protector. But there wasn't horror, mainly because the brilliant art style acted as a tonal barrier. Despite playing as Venom for a tenth of Ultimate Spider-Man's runtime, there's more complexity here. The concept isn't the surprise, it's the detail. Ferocious animations, unique finishers, special abilities that could have been a reskin of Black Suit Spider-Man's but aren't. There's a grab attack that unlocks further options for Pete's sake. No wonder Insomniac were working on an apparently cancelled Venom game because the foundation in Spidey 2 is so strong. His visual design brings the horror. The game's already made the symbiote an effective monster through the eyes of MJ, but seeing it at its full potential, the size of a car and strong enough to destroy a whole lab, we begin to relish in the carnage. Pun intended. It's an homage to the classics. The tentacles coating his skin bulge in ripple-like veins. The mouth snaps open at a 180-degree angle. Insomniac knew that the original Venom design was iconic for a reason. Why change something that already slots into your vision so perfectly? Venom bursts out of Oscorp and lands in Times Square. The dregs of a festival shimmer under thick lights. Under Kraven's orders, the hunters have arrived to capture his latest prey. As soon as Pete ripped the suit off, it felt inevitable that Venom would swoop in and give the hunter what he desired. A mauled face, a fountain of blood, and a fitting death. Kraven Round 2 is simple because Venom's moveset is simple. The two complement each other, a wet, shimmering brawl in the heart of Manhattan. Kraven finally does away with his tech, gadgets, and tricks. Pushed to the brink and faced with a true monster, he faces his opponent with a bare chest and a roar, and goes out in a gush of violence. With his murder, our villain death count rises to 6. As a sequel, Spidey 2 is a bloodbath. Shame that 4 of those kills were off screen. When the credits roll, Venom feels like he was bolted onto the end of a game all about him. None of Insomniac's Spidey games have perfect pacing, but there's something lackluster about how he's handled in the third act because of how quick it all is and how little screen time he's given after his whirling introduction. But you can trace what was planned and how it could have all come together seamlessly. He and Kraven are matched thematically. Gene Park made the joke on Last Stand Media that as a cancer sufferer himself, he got a real kick out of playing as Venom here. It felt like 2 cancer patients kicking the shit out of each other in the middle of Times Square. It's a raw joke, but the feeling stands. Venom and Kraven are 2 sick men with nothing to lose, thrashing at each other in a sleeping city that never sleeps. What do we become when death comes knocking before we're ready? Kraven believes that everyone is either predator or prey. In Venom, he's finally met his match. Looking back at the comics, that terminal aspect informs Insomniac's Venom. They pull from 3 major Venom arcs: The Origin, The Lethal Protector, and Flash Thompson. Flash bore the symbiote in 2011 after losing his legs at war. He'd go on Black Ops missions, and in return, the symbiote would let him walk again. Making Venom a disabled anti-hero drew a crowd, and while it's not the rendition your dad's gonna know, he's become a fan favourite. Harry is terminally ill. Flash isn't, but the essence is here. Venom's origin was in 1988, Amazing Spider-Man number 300. The goop slimed all over Eddie Brock and latched onto his thirst for revenge against Spider-Man. The symbiote and Eddie wanted to get back at Spidey, so the symbiosis was quick, painless, and let Eddie remain in control. The symbiote warped his mind, but it was always him Spider-Man fought, even when he was drooling and lolling that humongous tongue. In that arc, Venom visits Aunt May's house to publicly tempt Peter into fighting him. He keeps an easy smile, but the darkness glints in the corner of his eye. Insomniac's Venom is more monster than man. While his character is defined by Harry as the host, Venom is our enemy, not Harry. The Lethal Protector arc is my favourite and the inspiration for Sony's Venom trilogy. He's an anti-hero and a goofball, prone to eating muggers and scaring the people he's trying to save.
You're safe now. No, please, there's no need to thank us. Your joy is reward enough, and sends me leaping happily on my way.
I get that people wanted goofy Venom, but it wouldn't have worked for this game. To go from symbiote Spidey in the subway tunnel to Venom goofing around in the third act would have been jarring. But the Protector angle has certainly carried over. After Kraven's death, everything Venom does is with good intentions. He's not fueled by rage or revenge, he wants to help people. When he speaks, Harry doesn't hear Tony Todd, he hears his mother.
Don't be scared, honey. You finally have the power to do what we've always wanted. We're going to heal the world.
Venom has a hero complex. The symbiote has been moulded by its time with Peter, his desire to save everyone, and when it coats Harry it brings Spidey's heroism with it, boosted by Harry's need to live up to the memory of his mother. Whether or not he's tricked by Venom or just enhanced by him is up for debate, but his plan is to spread tendrils through New York and eventually the world. If the symbiote healed him, why couldn't it heal everyone? He just needs his best friend by his side to fulfill the dream. So, why is he just sitting in a subway station? In a matter of minutes, New York kind of changes. A handful of symbiote nests shoot up into the sky, and active crimes change to bring in the symbiotes as a new enemy faction. But Venom's presence is a slow burn rather than a stark evolution. 5 minutes from the final mission, tendrils will latch onto buildings. The game designates them perchable, and they make running up buildings tougher because Pete and Miles can't automatically hop over them, but the game never takes advantage of this change to the terrain. It's Spider-Man 1's final act, but less impressive and less detailed. New Yorkers still walk the streets like nothing has changed, shopping, high-fiving Spider-Man and lounging around. What does herald a tone shift is how the symbiotes are just people, so our final act is us beating up New Yorkers to rip them out of the slime. It keeps the game's darkness front and center. We're hurting people to save them. But where's Venom? Our third act dies on a pile of false advertising. Not one, but 2 cinematic trailers showed him facing down the Spider-Men in the streets of New York. This one is how the game was announced at a State of Play, which is fair enough, it's just a hype clip. But this one was playing on TVs, YouTube ads, cinemas, after the game released, and showed a full-blown brawl in the open. Never mind the promotional artwork or the collector's edition statue, and I cannot believe I bought this. It didn't even have a physical copy of the game. Nothing like this ever happens in the game. Just like how Kraven's presence is dampened by the fact he's missing from the open world, so too is Venom's. We now know that it was planned and prototyped, and we also know that as the finish line approached during development, the scope of the game got too big and Insomniac had to pull back. Some stuff had to take a hit before release, and you feel that hit in Act 3. So where is Venom?
Harry. You're not Harry. We are.
Venom twists Harry up, but he still thinks he's coming to Peter as a friend. Still shots pin the tension down. It's not just that MJ is here and she could get hurt, Harry could destroy May's house. In the comics and the animated series, Venom doesn't trigger Pete's spider sense because the symbiote has bonded with him previously. Whether it's because of this, the toll of the past day, or the shock of Harry becoming an enemy, he crushes Pete under a fridge. And the 2 worst things that could happen do. May's house is trashed, and MJ is smothered by the symbiote. Scream is born. Who the hell is Scream, I hear you ask? Let me find it. The year is 1993. The 4th issue of Venom Lethal Protector taught us that each symbiote carries 7 seeds that can eventually birth more symbiotes. Scream is one of those seeds. She's Venom's kid, and a result of the symbiote madness that gripped Marvel in the 90s. Scream's yellow and red color palette is a neat transition from MJ. The yellow jacket is a nice touch. As a boss, she's no slouch. 3 health bars don't translate to 3 distinct phases, but using suburbia as a setting means we can use car alarms and construction piping to shock her with sonic sound. As a fight, Scream's focus is more on Pete and MJ's argument than a sincere layered boss fight. And that is where she dips to the worst boss in the game. The writing actively spoils the battle. Everything we've learned about the symbiote up until this point teaches us that it amplifies character traits you already have because it feeds off you and devours your personality. It's what makes the relative bonding with Pete and Harry legitimately powerful because it lets the symbiote act as a narrative device, a way to learn about their psychological shadows. So what does Scream teach us about MJ? She thinks Spider-Man is bad for New York. She thinks Pete isn't supportive of her. Her life is constantly interrupted by Pete's involvement. She doesn't feel prioritized by Pete, with spider duties taking precedence. This is a stark difference from how she's characterized in the comics, and while I don't need Insomniac's MJ to be identical to comic book MJ, this feels like a primary character trait that has just been scrapped. She doesn't need Pete's validation. That is something that was key to her character in the first game, never mind the comics. She sees Pete as a distraction. She thinks Pete has a hero complex. Well, to be fair, that part's true. She doesn't trust him and thinks he's self-involved. Why are they dating again? She's only been bonded with the symbiote for 5 minutes too, so it's not even like it needs to dig deep to find this stuff. The argument could be made that she has internalized all of Jonah's rants after working with him for so long, but that's not explored. The dialogue that frames all of this is cheesy at best and thinks it's more powerful than it is. "Your dreams are just as important as mine," Spider-Man yells, a few months after swallowing his fear of abandoning the city and going to Symkaria to help MJ with her project.
Watson, where are you with my apple fritters? I'm starving, and
Jonah? Kiss my ass. I quit.
Watson!
You're so cool.
The boss acts as conflict resolution for the pair, but it doesn't really resolve anything. She'll go on to quit her job and become a solo podcaster, a job she thinks involves no audio editing. If you wrote your book the way you make content, MJ, no wonder it flopped. I liked playing Peter in the first movie a lot. I liked playing a version of Peter where he was a little bit older, but he was tired. He didn't want to do all the swinging around and saving everybody, but he felt like he had to. In this movie, I like that he's growing and changing. We're seeing a version of Peter Parker we've never seen. He's a father. He sees something special in his daughter, you know? More so than the regular parent, he actually thinks she might have something to her. At MomoCon in 2023, Yuri Lowenthal said, "We looked at addiction in people and what the behaviours of addiction are. That's really what we went to for inspiration and to find the levels of it. It's not always the same every time. Addiction is the inspiration." This is something that's been echoed a lot by comic book YouTubers and Brian Intihar himself. The black suit is a story about addiction, people say. But is it? That's not the case in the source material. Pete likes the suit, realizes it's an alien, and cuts it loose without a second thought. It's not the case in the animated series either. Even when it starts to change his personality, he rips the thing off once he realizes something's wrong and never looks back. In Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, he relishes the thing, but once he realizes it's dangerous, he hops over to the bell tower and wrenches it off. Where did this idea come from? If the black suit arc is an allegory for addiction, I think it's a bad one because it doesn't confront the realities. Addiction isn't something you can get rid of. Just look at alcoholics. Even those in recovery, those who haven't touched a drop in decades, refer to themselves as an alcoholic because the danger of the addiction remains. When it comes to the symbiote, once Pete rips it off, it never curdles at the corner of his mind. Later comics have retconned the tale, saying that Pete likes how the black makes him feel, how it makes crooks scared of him, but if we're taking this theme of addiction seriously, that's a band-aid. Spider-Man 2 starts to explore this in a gorgeous, clean way that offers opportunities to get a little messy with it. Kurt Connors tells Pete that even though the suit is gone, he's still attached to the symbiote mentally, emotionally. But what at first seems like an emotional twist on the addiction angle, finally forcing Pete to confront the longevity of addiction, perhaps bringing some thematic withdrawals into the mix, turns into a clumsy and frustrating way to bring back symbiote abilities in combat. This doesn't just sidestep a great opportunity to look at addiction, it slaps it in the face and makes Insomniac's Black Suit saga worse.
Harry's been busy. Yeah. Well, good thing the cleanup crew's here.
With Scream defeated and MJ returned to normal, Pete and Miles head to City Hall and join Martin Lee in a battle against Venom's forces. It's too much. Pete collapses under an alien pile, choking on the psychic connection he has to the symbiote, and Lee has an idea. He grabs Miles and the two dive into Pete's psyche. What greets us is deafening and brutal. A warped world defined by the failures of both Spider and Man. A raft full of prison escapees swarm us, a flow of villains who are put away and break out again. The superhero super-villain cycle that never ends. Until the symbiote. We see it encroaching on the space. Deep down, even though the black suit is gone, Pete feels that it could help him break the circle. At the end of the road is May's house, the final destination of Pete's wandering thoughts. A simple room with a simple bed holding the lifeless body of May.
This is all my fault. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
If only he'd been a better Spider-Man. It's raw, it's powerful, it's brutal, and it hurts. And then it starts to go wrong. When Pete loses the suit, we, the player, face about an hour of combat where the Venom powers are gone and we revert back to using the Iron Spider abilities. Rage mode is gone, the brutal power of the tentacles vanish, the difficulty, at least when playing as Pete, is bumped up a notch. We feel through the gameplay how comforting and easy everything felt in the suit. We start to crave it, a brilliant blend of theme and gameplay that takes the black suit addiction seriously. And then Mr. Negative ruins it.
Spider-Man! Spider-Man, wake up!
He gives up his powers to purge the symbiote residence in Pete, and the anti-Venom suit is born. This is one of those times I wish Insomniac ignored the source material, because Mr. Negative plus symbiote equals anti-Venom is pulled right out of Dan Slott's comics run. In the game's case, the anti-Venom suit looks sweet and feels sweet to use. It's stronger than the black suit because it specifically targets symbiotes, the main enemies we're battling when we get it. They crisp and crackle because the suit burns them, a small detail that enhances the power fantasy. But that power fantasy spoils the message. Anti-venom is all of the upsides with none of the downsides. The impact of sacrificing the black suit's cool moves to demonstrate Pete's hard work in giving up the symbiote is lost, so that we can still do some bow-pam splat moves while swinging around in the endgame. It's the easy way out for the game and for Peter, like giving up heroin but getting the same high from dentist-approved chewing gum. At least it's cool. White symbiotes are always cool. I wonder who the artist was who originally designed it. Good luck finding that information in the game, because it isn't there for any of the suits. In the long list of people who worked on Spider-Man 2, not a single one was tasked with accreditation for the comic-based suits. What artists designed them? What book did they originate in? Where do I go to learn more about some of these cool, iconic looks? It was a pet peeve in Spider-Man Remastered, it was a frustrating reoccurrence in Spider-Man Miles Morales, and now, with Spider-Man 2 rolling out 80 suits, it feels on purpose. Jesus, Insomniac, hit me up and I'll do it for free when Spidey 3 rolls around. I can honestly say that I would sacrifice every MJ mission, even the really good one, for a couple of lines of text next to each suit. Can you imagine how insulting it must be to be Humberto Ramos, the artist behind the Arachnite? You see this $300 million Spider-Man game hit record sales, spurred on by a marketing department that's encouraging people to play with the different suits in photo mode and share them, and your name isn't anywhere in the game, despite your work being agonizingly replicated by the dev team. Fool me once, Insomniac, but we're at the point where it feels pretty gross. Do you know what game has suit accreditation? Guardians of the Galaxy, but I've talked enough about how that game rocks. No, Marvel Rivals is what I'm talking about. Marvel Rivals, a free-to-play Overwatch killer. Video games are complicated, but this is a simple fix. All you need is a text box next to each suit telling us where it debuted and who the artists and writers were on that debut. And it's not just the fact artists aren't being credited or an open goal to celebrate Spider-Man's history is left unkicked, it actually impacts good, heartfelt charity work too. Post-release, 2 new suits were sold for $4.99 with the proceeds going to the charity Gameheads. They're dumb, they're silly, they're colourful, they're never my go-to choice, but the idea is wonderful. However, there is every chance that even if you bought these suits, you wouldn't know what charity you're supporting. Gameheads focuses on low-income youth, getting them into the games industry and upskilling people so they can go on to make more games. Artists at Gameheads designed these suits. Who are the artists? I try my damnedest to find out, but there's no information anywhere. The name of the charity isn't even in the game.
Where are you gonna go?
To set things right.
With Lee giving up his powers to save us, Pete sees that the other Spider-Man has apparently done what he claims he never could. He's reformed one of his villains. It makes him reconsider his place as Spider-Man. Does he have anything left to teach Miles? Yes, I'd argue, Miles didn't reform Mysterio or Tombstone, did he? You were the catalyst that led to that, Pete, but while the duo keep fighting symbiotes, let's get back to the suits. Here's a bit of maths for you. Out of the 80 suits, 19% are taken from films, 44% are original designs, and 37% are pulled from comics. Out of that 80, almost all of them come with color variants so you can swap and slide your look to embrace a multicolored Spidey. That's a lot, so it feels a little greedy of me to say I missed the Fantastic Bagman and the Spider Boxers, but hey, I get it, all of these suits had to be remade from the ground up, so some stuff had to be cut. Besides, a lot of what we do get are absolute standouts. Not every suit is a winner. Mark Bagley's life story suits are purposefully bulky and awkward spaceware that don't translate, but deep in the menu is some gold dust. The last hunt suits Pete and Miles get for completing all the hunter bases are breathtaking, with the cool furred collar and gauntlets. I just wish there was a red variant because I'd wear this all the time. Pete's starter suit has a more vibrant red, making the Advanced Suit 2.0 an improvement over the suit from the original game. I loved the orange shading in that game, and the OG is still in the menu if you want it, but saturating the red makes Pete stand out more against this new, highly detailed New York. The Scarlet Spider number 3 comes from Peter David and Mark Bagley. The wide eyes with the coloured hood make him both edgy and stylish. Shout out to my patrons because I got confused and thought this was an original design. Do you know what would have helped there? Suit accreditation! The game even does the impossible and makes me like the suit Chase Conley designed for Miles' 10th anniversary. The pinky hue of the red has a satisfying pop here that gets lost on the page. It's just a shame that the oversized sweater that covers up his mouth spoils it. Because he has less history, Miles gets some of the cooler cooler and sillier original designs. The city sound suit is nonsense, giving Miles a fedora and sweater vest, but sometimes silly top's cool, and I wore this for longer than I'd care to admit. He brings homages to Wolverine, Black Panther, and Mysterio, and the texture on every fit makes Spider-Man 1's already impressive attention to detail look like home ec stitching by comparison. When web gliding, Pete's Civil War's outfit has a different wingsuit that's metal and mechanical to stay in theme with how ramshackle and cobbled together it is. The apocalyptic suit has a lock of Mary Jane's hair in the gauntlet. Mysterio's helmet swirls smoke and mist. The toes of Panther's fit are carved up to look like paws. The Wolverine mask has the thick plastic of a helmet rather than cloth, and one of these variants even lets us change to the X-Force colors. When this game is great, it is great. But do you know what isn't great? The evolved suit.
That suit's not an alien, is it? It's time for a Miles Morales original, you know?
I know we're all agreed on this, but this sucks on 3 levels. Let's break them down. Sucky suck number 1, the look. The bottom half being a plain black colour makes the suit look like pants and a hoodie, not a supersuit. Less a skin-tight wetsuit and more awkward gym clothes. The top of the headwear is cut off, meaning Miles is wearing a tube sock on his head, not a mask. The electric blue might connect to his new power set, but it grossly clashes with everything else. And because it's only 4 legs, the symbol on his chest isn't even a spider. Sucky suck number 2, the branding. The fanbase has sarcastically dubbed this suit the Adidas suit because of the shameless branding on the trainers and because in the real world Adidas sold the suit as gym gear and these exact trainers for $230. Miles wore brands before, something that was always a little bit awkward, but the real world collaboration and the way it's framed as his game-defining final suit goes beyond that. In this exact game, Miles says that they don't accept sponsorships. In the previous game, he shuts down Genki's idea to put ads on the Friendly Neighborhood app. While I get that the Spider-Men are hardly taking money from Adidas in World, Miles Morales' look engaging in corporate collaboration is at best in bad taste. Sucky suck number 3, the context. So I guess during the symbiote invasion, Miles hopped home and whipped out the sewing machine? He just appears wearing the suit with zero build-up. You can't change the suit for the final confrontation, even the eye-searing colour palette can't be swapped out for cutscenes. So no matter what, you are stuck with this when Miles faces Venom. But it's what the suit represents that's really clumsy. In the art book, Jacinda Chu wrote, "The evolved suit was designed to show that Miles has grown up and figured some things out by the end of the game. His first suit was a hand-me-down from Peter, so we wanted to make something unique for Miles and highlight how he's different." It's time for a Miles Morales original, you know? Miles says, apparently forgetting about that time in his origin that he made a Miles Morales original in a spectacular montage. The evolved suit treats his black and red look like the clothes of an apprentice, despite the fact he had grown into his own Spider-Man by the end of his own game. It acts as a button to tell us Miles is his own hero now, but when this game opens, he is already his own hero. The through line for him is that he learns to let go of his anger, but nothing about this suit tells me that. "Call the play, coach," Pete tells him, echoing what Miles said to him in the first game. Next stop, Connor's underground lab. Venom's going after the meteorite that crashed with the symbiote all those years ago. If he gets his hands on it, he'll be able to heal the world.
Harry's gone. Host and symbiote are perfectly fused.
I'll find a way to save him.
You can't. But you can still stop the symbiote.
How?
By killing the host.
The symbiote fundamentally turns Peter into a different Peter and Spider-Man into a different Spider-Man. That was the big challenge for this one because I had settled into a very comfortable place with Pete. To get your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man to not be friendly, to be mean and selfish instead and violent, it's exhausting. Any actor will tell you that villains are more fun, and while I was excited to do that, I wasn't aware how difficult that would be. We're turning Peter into something that is so antithetical to who he is at his core, it was harder than I thought. I think we always look at Peter as someone who puts everyone else first, his friends first, his family first, the entire population of New York City before his own needs. And the symbiote takes all that away. It arguably makes him more powerful than he is without it, and takes away the famed responsibility that we're used to seeing him have to keep his powers in check. What was important to us in this game is tracking the effect of the symbiote. When he gets it right away, he doesn't immediately flip a switch and turn into the most evil person in the world. He doesn't turn into a supervillain. I think for Insomniac, tracking the progression of Pete and the effect of the symbiote was really important. We spent a lot of time finding those checkpoints along the way, because when you're making a game like this, it's like shooting a movie, you're never doing it in order. Sometimes Chris Zimmerman, the performance director, would have to rein me in or push me further. She's like, okay, now you're playing him at the end of his experience with the symbiote, but he's only just had it, so he's still actually quite excited about it. It was fun to do, but was definitely hard. Echoing the closing chapter of Spider-Man 1, our Save the World plot is funneled through one person. Once again, Peter is faced with an impossible choice: save the city or save Harry. Connors tells us the symbiote has fused our pal completely. The only way to stop Venom is to kill him. Right? Wrong. Another option is presented. If we can destroy the meteorite, we might be able to separate Harry from Venom. MJ is going to grab the space rock. Miles is going to hold off the symbiotes. Peter is going to distract Harry.
Let's heal the world. For real this time.
For Pete, this means a high-octane chase across the city where, for the first time in the series, the roles are reversed. Pete isn't the chaser, he's the chasee, putting Venom's terror at the forefront, building him up as a menace, and bringing his threat finally into the world, rather than containing it to arenas. Oh, what's that? We don't get to play that? We're playing Starship Troopers with MJ instead? Why are you like this, Spider-Man 2? Let me love you! I'm looking back at my pages of writing here, and I'm struggling to reconcile what this is turned into. I like Spider-Man 2, so why does this all feel so flat? Why am I coming to the end of a deep dive liking the game less than I did when the credits rolled? I see the $300 million budget, I'm witnessing the spectacle, and I understand the stakes. I see how glorious Venom's arena is, with tentacles lifting Midtown High's gym and football field into the sky for a showdown. I get the poetry that Peter and Harry are beating the shit out of each other in a setting that represents their last fond memory together and the place where Harry's world fell apart. I am noting that everything ending in the ruins of the Emily May Foundation represents the shattered dream and broken promise of the game's first act, and I feel nothing. Because that broken promise isn't just relevant in-game, it's metatextual.
This is where we became best friends.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2's ending is weak. It simultaneously wastes time and feels rushed. It doesn't deliver an emotional blow despite its performances, and Venom isn't close to the game's best boss fight. In fact, because of how badly we need this bust-up to be great to save the third act, that context makes it the worst. Peter fights him first. The trick is stunning him with our Sonic Blast or Anti-Venom abilities. We're forced to leap between the three arenas because he can coat the ground in goop, and when we get him to a second phase, Insomniac pump the arena with symbiote grunts to pressure us. This is the only time in the entire game that the design relies on this. The argument is that Peter needs to recharge his focus and his abilities because Venom can become invulnerable, but that setup harks back to the underwhelming boss design of the first game, something I thought this sequel had fixed. Please, let me love you. Pete loses. Venom sprouts wings, grabs his limp body and charges off to Emily May. Miles is waiting patiently for his turn, electricity crackling through his body, ready for phases 3 and 4. When it comes to gameplay, Venom is defeated by a guy who had precisely one conversation with Harry Osborn over the phone. When they met at Coney Island, he shook his hand but didn't even say hello. Winged Venom's third phase is focused on flying, making the most of all that aerial combat we've been practicing up until now. His fourth alternates. It's long, it's tough, and it lacks all emotional resonance because Venom and Harry barely know who this guy is. One of the things the story gets so right is Pete and Harry's relationship. Whether it's because of Yuri Lowenthal and Graham Phillips' performances, or the time the game's taken to let us experience their love for one another, I feel the heartache of these two brothers. So with that in mind, we come back to the word why. Why is Miles the second half of the fight? Why does it feel like the structure of this boss is the wrong way round? I've seen takes that Peter gets nerfed in this game while Miles gets better and stronger. I don't think that's the problem. What leaves me cold is that after treading water for 90% of the campaign, the conclusion to Pete's story is given to Miles. Pete might use the anti-venom to purge the symbiote, but it's Miles who beats Venom back. It's Miles who saves Harry's life with his bioelectricity. It's Miles who reforms a major villain. When the dust settles, what is Pete's arc? What does he learn?
I just haven't been talking to you about what I should have been talking to you about. Pete. Wait, let me start again.
I got this.
Not in that suit you don't. Also put your mask on, you're just standing in the middle of Queens. In a spoiler cast with IO9, the game's narrative director Ben Arfman was asked about Miles becoming Insomniac's main Spider-Man moving forward. It always felt very natural, he said, and I think we all collectively thought it would happen. To me, it shows a great deal of evolution from Miles. At the beginning of the game, we see him struggling to figure out what he wants to do with his life. By the end, we had Miles carrying the burden of saving the city and also carrying Pete when Pete wasn't strong enough to carry himself. So Peter learns that he shouldn't be Spider-Man anymore? Pete retiring as the Spider to start Emily May from his home is awesome. It always felt like Insomniac's Spider series was going to end with Peter Parker giving up the mask. But I don't think any of us expected him to retire in disgrace. Everyone wears confident smiles as Pete passes the city's responsibility to Miles, but after everything the game has shown us, this feels like a bad ending. Of course, he's not going to be without the suit for long. Our post-credits scenes show that Norman Osborn blames Spider-Man for Harry's coma, and Otto Octavius is working on a master plan from prison. Whether Pete wants it or not, both villains are going to rip him out of retirement. But that doesn't change the narrative beat here. His Spidey career ends at an all-time low. Aunt May is dead. His mentor poisoned half the city. Harry is in a coma. New York doesn't trust him because of what he did in the black suit. He's burned bridges and broken hearts. The retirement doesn't feel earned, it feels like a punishment.
Peter! I put this together for you because I knew when we got through this crazy time, whenever we got through it, I wanted you to have these.
The main reason this feels like a punishment is because of what we do in the epilogue. A heartfelt final message from Harry, recorded before he became Venom, tells Pete that even though the Emily May Foundation is destroyed, the idea will live on with them. He recovers a piece of bark from his mum's tree, one of the May blossoms, and the bee drones. Look at the bee drones. We love the bee drones. Spider-Man, baby, save the bees! It's a sweet final beat to end on, but it's colored by a science puzzle. Peter Parker is Spider-Man no more. He's going to spend his days tinkering in his shed and fully embracing the worst gameplay the sequel has to offer. He overcomes his hero complex. But at what cost? And why, despite it all, do I still like this game? Here's the thing about video games. Because there are so many moving parts, both behind the scenes and on the disc, it's very easy to barrel your criticisms into one and poke holes, watching as those holes connect and open up to a huge gaping wound that distracts from all the great stuff. Spidey 2 is like a tower of Lego that arrived with pieces missing. A skill tree that forces you to re-unlock basic abilities. Stealth that banishes every good gadget. A story that stumbles along the way, resting on the goodwill fans have of its previous titles and the hype that surrounds yet another Black Suit story. But that tower still holds, even as you take more and more pieces away. Social media feed, gone. Suit abilities, gone. They're not replaced with better blocks, but there are other blocks here that keep the whole thing steady enough. Gadgets might be watered down, but the web lines are cool. You might have to unlock a bunch of old stuff, but traversal has never felt tighter with more options. Suit accreditation is still missing, but they look better than ever. That social media feed might be gone, but this is still the best New York has ever been. The story might end with a whimper, but the parts that are good are so good that it is easy to ignore when it gets rough. How big, how weighted those blocks are is up to you. With all the great stuff built into its foundation, does the tower hold? And as for me, like I said, it's complex.
Turning the pages of my life. sounded